The study session for the Aurora City Council for Monday, October 18, 2021 is called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Mayor Kaufman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen?
Here, and Angela Lawson needs a link to get in.
Thank you. We're forwarding it to her right now. Councilmember Coons? Councilmember Berzins? Councilmember Berzins? Councilmember Gardner?
Here.
Councilmember Gruber?
Here.
Councilmember Hiltz? Councilmember Hiltz? Councilmember Lawson? Councilmember Marcano?
Present.
Councilmember Murillo? Councilmember Hiltz, I think I see you on now.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Councilmember Coombs? Councilmember Berzins? Okay, I will check on them to see if they're having trouble logging in.
Katie, do you want a 5-minute recess to do that? I don't think, do we have a quorum?
Mayor, we can do the announcement of the call-in line first.
Okay, please proceed.
Councilmember Lawson, I'm just gonna make a note that you're here, and I'm counting you as present.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure why I'm not getting the link anymore, but I appreciate you sending it.
Okay, yeah, we can. I'll touch base with you after the meeting, and we can try to figure that out for you.
Katie, let me know when we're done with the announcement for the call-in line.
Yes, Mayor. I believe we're also having technical difficulties with Rogers.
Yeah. I'm not hearing it, yeah.
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started, and I'll try to get everybody on the meeting and see what's going on.
There is no mayor update. Are there any issue updates? No issue updates.
Mayor?
Yes.
Mayor? Wait, just...
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you. I know we changed our meetings to include an additional Monday so that we have 2 study sessions a month as well as the council meetings. These study sessions are super, super long, and I just noticed our agenda tonight is really full. I can't even pull anything off the consent calendar because it would just increase the time that we're on the meeting. Do you think we're going to get through everything tonight? Or is there any room for delay of items?
No, I think we'll be able to get through everything.
Okay, thank you.
Consent calendar. Items 2A through 2L. Are there any objections to moving items 2A through 2L forward? Seeing none, item 2A through 2L will move forward. Item number 3A, 2022 federal lobbying contract renewal. Luke Palmisano.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Luke Palmisano, Intergovernmental Relations Manager. I'll give a quick presentation on this item as well as 3B, the state lobbying contract. Staff is bringing forward a renewal of both the federal and state lobbying contracts with our respective federal and state lobbying teams. That's Holland and Knight on the federal level and Capital Partners at the state. This is the final option year of both contracts. These were presented at the August 25th FSIR committee and was referred unanimously for full council consideration. The question before council tonight is whether to move both of these contracts to the regular council meeting for final consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Is there any objection to moving item number 3A and 3B forward? Then item number 3A and 3B will move forward.
All right, thank you very much.
Item number 3C, Aurora Water State Lobbying Services Contract Renewal.
Hi, this is Kathy Kitzman, Water Resources Principal with the Water Department, and this is similar to items 3A and 3B. And this is a renewal of a competitively bid contract for Aurora Water State Lobbying Services for Colorado advocates for the following, for next year. And the question to council is if the item might be approved and moved to the next available regular session.
Is there any objection to moving item number 3C forward? Seeing none, item number 3C will move forward. Item number 3D, renaming the Aurora Water Building at the Southeast Area Maintenance Facility, the Daniel P. Micel Water Operations Facility. Marshall Brown.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Marshall Brown with Aurora Water. Aurora Water has a history of naming significant facilities in recognition of departed or retired directors who've contributed significantly to the corresponding facility and have served for extended periods of time. Those facilities currently include the Binney Water Purification Facility, the Wemlinger Water Purification Facility, and the Griswold Water Purification Facility that were all named after prior directors. Dan Meixel was originally hired by the city in March of 1981, served in multiple capacities, including as the acting director of the utility from 2011 to 2012, and then thereafter served most recently as the Director of Operations and Environmental Programs. Dan contributed significantly to many efforts within the utility. One of the things that he had a huge part in was the acquisition of the property for the Southeast Area Maintenance Facility and the initial design and all the studies to help assess the needs and determine what needed to be out at that facility. So we are requesting the ability to name the Aurora Water Operations buildings at SEAM after Dan Meixel.
Are there any objections to moving item number 3D forward? Seeing none, item number 3D will move forward. Item number 3E, acknowledgement of the supporters of the Aurora Armed Forces Treatment Court resolution. Jason Batchelor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item was actually came through the Public Safety Committee at the request Councilmember Gruber. So if you're okay with it, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Gruber to discuss the resolution.
Councilmember Gruber.
Several council members were involved in standing up the Armed Forces Treatment Court. Councilmember Hills, Councilmember Johnson, and I have worked this for a number of years. Judge Day has done the lion's share of work, actually bringing it together. And there have been many people, many organizations that have volunteered to help. The Municipal Armed Forces Treatment Court is not funded congressionally like the county courts and the state courts are. So this one is the result of volunteers. This resolution thanks those volunteers and will simply give them a piece of paper showing them that the city of Aurora is appreciative of their efforts in taking care of our veterans.
Thank you for your service, Councilmember Gruber, and for your involvement. Further discussion on item number 3E. Seeing no further discussion, is there any objection to moving item number 3E forward?
I have a question.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen.
And I missed this, maybe if Councilmember Gruber already mentioned it, but in terms of the metrics, are we going to be measuring anything for that court in terms of success?
Yes, I don't see Judge Day on, but yes, so the idea of the Armed Forces Treatment Court is that a veteran comes in with a problem, goes to the judge identifies a course of action for the person to take in order to divert him or her from going to jail. The person is responsible for following all of the actions that the court determines, to include counseling, to include work skills, to include whatever the court mandates. And at the end of the process, the person who successfully completes it will go through a graduation ceremony. A person who does not complete it, does not successfully complete it, will go into the court system and be treated just like anybody else. So this is another one of the diversion courts, with another concept in order to keep people out of jail, deal with the special experiences that they have, in this case as a veteran, and move them forward and get them back on the right track to rejoin society.
Okay, thank you so much.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So to clarify, this is to give some kind of a certificate to the volunteers that have supported this effort, not necessarily everyone else for doing their jobs, right?
No, this is for those organizations that have gone above and beyond. Well, they're not being paid. This is for those organizations that have volunteered, especially like the Storm Center at the Denver University, the Psychological Support Center. They're doing all of this gratis to help the veteran community. Their charter is to support the veterans, but they've expanded their charter to embrace the court.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving 3E forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3E will move forward. Item number 3F, battery operated alarmed electric fence ordinance. Jason Bessler.
Yes, sir. This is an ordinance that Councilmember Gardner is sponsoring and bringing forward. So if there's no objections, I'll turn it over to him to kind of talk about the ordinance.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, this ordinance is essentially allows businesses in our community to install a battery-operated fence to protect their merchandise. So a couple of use cases: marijuana house, grow houses, equipment rentals, uniform stores, stores like that, retail stores. Industrial uses that need to protect high-value merchandise. So this was presented at PED several months ago, probably 3 or 4 months ago at this point, and we've had, I would say, a fairly long process with staff, kind of going back and forth and ironing out some details. And I believe we're at a place now where staff is comfortable with what we're bringing forward. I do have a representative, Nikki Huggins, from the manufacturer of one of these fence companies on the line to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions? Mayor Pro Tem.
Just, I think I I think I know, but this was there was a change on how far they could be from residences, right? Maybe Councilmember Gardner.
That's correct. So there's a 300-foot setback in the ordinance, and that came from discussions at PUD. And essentially, what would happen is if there were uses within 300 feet of a residential area, the application would go to the planning department to determine how to proceed. There's some things that could be installed, like screening and other, I guess, physical barriers that would block the view from the residential areas.
Okay.
But yes, that was a result of the PED presentation.
Okay, thanks so much.
Mayor?
Councilmember Lawson.
Yeah, so I know when this came to PED, I mean, I know it went through, and I was a little bit more of the hesitant person on this. And I just wanted to ask, is there somebody from police and fire? I mean, it looks like you've worked through some of the questions, but I just want to know, are they okay with this? Because I know that after that meeting, I had talked to someone from police and they still had some issues with it. So it looks like some things went back and forth, but is there a representative from police or fire to say that this is fine?
I can speak for fire, Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you. If you could, that would be great.
Yeah, speaking for the fire department, we did work a long time with the other city departments and came to compromise that meets what we need as far as accessing and de-energizing these. So we are content with the ordinance.
Is there someone from police that could speak on that as well?
Commander Lanigan's on the line.
Okay, I think I did talk to you, Commander Lanigan, about it after PED, that discussion. So I'm glad that you're here.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. It took me a minute to get in there. I'm on the same page with the fire department. We worked through our problems and we came through the ideas of making sure we can de-energize and that there's security measures in place to where either our officers will not get electrocuted or the general public will not get electrocuted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further discussion.
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
I'm very pleased to hear that that we've come to agreements within the city. I agree with Councilmember Lawson that when we debated this or discussed this at PED, there were several concerns raised. So my understanding now is that this is still going to be a conditional use. It'll still have to go before the Planning Commission. And my question is on those that are already installed. I'm assuming once we grant permission for these in the city, that those that are already installed will go to the Planning Commission and get their authorization in retrospect, and given the fact that they're already up. Is that what is going to happen?
So, Councilmember, there are some areas that would be conditional uses, and there's other areas that where I think it would be, as long as it meets certain conditions, it would be a use by right. It would be in a permitted zone. So if any of the existing fences fall in those areas that require a conditional use, they would go to the Planning Commission for conditional use approval. If they're in the other areas where it's a permitted use, then they would go through the process to receive the permit as outlined in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I support this ordinance.
Further discussion.
Mayor, Councilmember Marcano.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, sir. So I did see in the backup that there was an option added, or rather requirements added, to allow EMS and first responders generally access with Knox boxes and switches. So I think that's great. But I do have a question about the kind of liability that a business might face if someone injures themselves as a result of one of these fences. I know it's not exactly a particularly high voltage, but this is just like a concern. I can see someone potentially trying to bring a suit because of that. Can someone speak to that?
Tim Joyce, I was going to say, Tim Joyce, perhaps you could speak to that from the city attorney's office, and then perhaps one of the manufacturers could also speak to that if that's okay with council.
This is Tim Joyce. As far as liability, I don't see liability on the part of the city if someone were to touch the fence and get shocked by that. if there's a negligent installation or defective product, that liability would be on the manufacturer and the business that installed the equipment. But I don't see liability on the part of the city.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3F forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3F will move forward. Item number 3G, Gartrell Road Interchange Expansion Design Project IGA with E470. Brett Bonwart.
Yes, good evening. The proposed IGA for the Gartrell Road Interchange Expansion Improvement is a new IGA between City of Aurora and E470 Public Highway Authority to define the project development responsibilities and allow for city staff to oversee the planning and design for the future construction of the bridge widening and ramp intersection improvements, with E470 as a stakeholder and reviewer of the project. The South Aurora Regional Improvement Authority, SRIA, has identified the construction of this bridge facility improvements in its master plan and included funds to advance the design of the facility improvements in its first bonding package. The project will include planning and design of the bridge to support a minimum of full 5-lane roadway section with pedestrian and bike improvements and ramp intersection improvements. The IGA for the project between the city and SRIA has already been executed. The proposed IGA with E470 allows for the city to manage the design of the project and establishes E470 review authority and communication protocols.
Further discussion? Is there any opposition to moving item number 3G forward? Seeing no opposition, item number 3G will move forward. Item number 3H, IGA with E470 for the temporary traffic signals at Gartrell Road and E470. Carly Campuzano.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I'm Carly Campuzano. I'm the traffic manager at the city. This item is for an IGA for the temporary signals at Gartrell Road and E470 between the city and E470. These intersections are currently stop controlled, but they currently meet warrants for signalization. And this is related to the previous item, which was the IGA for the expansion of the bridge. So this item will install temporary signals prior to the expansion project construction to get them signalized as soon as possible. So these signals, like I said, will be just, more of a bare bones kind of temporary signal design that we're planning to get going on as quickly as possible. So this, with this agreement, the city would be responsible for the design using internal forces, and E470 would contribute funding for the actual construction, which is estimated to be about 1.2 million or less. We're going to be working on the design right now with the hopes of constructing next year, but expediting that obviously as much as possible. Thank you.
Further discussion on item number 3H.
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
So I'm very happy to see this go in. This is an area that I hear complaints about all of the time. Anything we can do to accelerate. I saw that in the backup material that as you said, design starts now, contracting starts in spring, and the estimated completion is spring of 23. Anything we can do to accelerate that would be greatly appreciated by the folks in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Further discussion.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, and I want to echo the same thing. As the Ward 6 council members, I get quite a lot of discussion on this. In fact, Carly has received some council requests from me on it. It did go through E470, was approved also at our last board meeting. And I just want to ask Carly, I know that there's trouble with getting materials on our traffic signals, and I know this is not the regular permanent signal, it's the temporary one. Do you anticipate any delays with the supply chain?
We definitely could have delays with the supply chain. The materials delays we've been experiencing have really been for all sorts of materials across the board, even including items that typically had not been hard to procure, like signing and striping materials. We've had trouble really getting pretty much all materials recently. So we're hoping that next year will be a little bit better, but we've also realized that we do need to expedite this as much as possible, and we did already get started on the design since we're using internal forces and didn't need to execute a contract. So we do have a preliminary design that we've already discussed and shown E470, and we're trying to expedite that as much as possible. But where we see the issues with the schedule are the materials, and then also the just getting the power source from Excel. So we're looking to engage them as soon as possible as well to try to get it done faster.
Okay, so we would be able, as soon as that design is done, you're able to go ahead and put an order in for the materials since we.
Yeah, we would put it out to bid as soon as possible. We're also trying to put it out to bid with a couple of our other signals to get better economies of scale and better bidding, because we've also noticed that if we put out smaller contracts, we get a lot less interest from contractors.
Oh,
so it's sort of a balance of trying to group it in with a bigger project, but then also trying to get it out as soon as possible. So we did start the design. We are thinking that it'll be out to bid within the next probably few months, early next year. And we can reach out to suppliers as well. And, you know, as the months go on, the next few months go on, and see if the supply chain issues are going to be sustained or not.
okay, great. And then just on Excel, I heard the same thing from E470 in terms of just the backlog with Excel and getting them to energize the signals. Is there anything that can speed that up, or we're just beholden to their schedule, I guess?
We've really been trying. I think, you know, they can't do their entire design until we have the design for the signals pretty well solidified. So we were just talking actually last week about what we can do to try to get Excel design forces going, but we really are at the mercy of their schedule in a lot of ways, because on these brand new signals, we need them to set up brand new transformer, which is a decent amount of work. And, you know, they have all sorts of staffing and materials issues just like the rest of us. So they try to work with us, but, you know, we have had a lot of delays with recent signal projects getting power in a timely fashion.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate everything you do for us.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item 3H forward? Item number 3H forward. Seeing no objections, item number 3H will move forward. Item number 3I, I-70 Piccadilly funding IGA with CDOT. Matt Kowaleski.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. The I-70 Piccadilly project represents a key piece of infrastructure needed for a rapidly developing region of our city, as well as Arapahoe and Adams counties. And the project will facilitate a much needed north-south connection on Piccadilly Road, as well as provide some critical access to I-70. In late 2019, the city was awarded a US DOT build grant, and that stands for Better Utilizing Investments to Leverage Development. And the award was for $25 million, which coincidentally was the maximum amount that was offered through that program. And there were only 2 build grants issued for the state of Colorado. To meet the requirements of that grant, the project team is running a few processes concurrently, including development of preliminary design plans, development of design build contract documents, as well as right-of-way acquisition plans and right-of-way acquisition itself. As part of the project team has identified and negotiated 5 intergovernmental agreements necessary to complete the project, and 2 of which have been reviewed by our Transportation, Airports, and Public Works Policy Committee and are before you this evening. The item in question, or 3I, is for the funding IGA with the Colorado Department of Transportation. The grant funds from USDOT are being administered by CDOT as what's known as a pass-through on behalf of the city of Aurora. That's a standard practice and for other transportation grant programs for local agencies to have that pass-through arrangement, and that's what this IGA before you is. In addition to the $25 million of federal funds and the mandatory 20% local match that CDOT is required to track in the IGA also identifies $5 million of safety funds that CDOT has added to the project for correction of a known safety issue in the I-70 geometry immediately adjacent to the project. It made sense to add that to the project, and they're funding it. The project's progressing, as I mentioned, with a design build delivery model to meet the grant deadline of fully obligating funds by June of next year. And as part of that, the project has shortlisted 3 teams and will be issuing a final RFP to those firms March of next year. And with that, I would open the floor to council with any questions you may have.
Does your, Matt, does your presentation address both item 3I and 3J?
I can if you'd like me to.
Yeah, why don't you proceed with 3J since it's related?
Absolutely. So item 3J is for the IGA with the US DOT, but it's known as a grant agreement, but for as far as the city is concerned, is progressing through our normal IGA process, but they refer to it as a grant agreement. The agreement establishes the scope for the project, as well as allows the city to administer the project and establishes the terms of the build grant program. Specifically, the agreement identifies target dates for major milestones, as well as establishes metrics for tracking the project's impact that will be measured prior to the project's initiation and after its completion. As I mentioned, the terms for reimbursement of eligible funds are not actually included in this agreement because they're in the agreement for the pass-through with CDOT. The grant agreement is more specific to the terms of the grant program itself. And
okay. Are there questions?
Yeah.
Sure. Questions for Matt? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3I and 3J forward? Seeing no objections, item number 3I and 3J will move forward. Item number 4A, Colorado Opioids Settlement Memorandum of Understanding. Kirsten Classbell.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Kirsten Classbell. As you know, as part of the Colorado Coalition, the City of Aurora has been involved in ongoing litigation against opioid manufacturers, distributors, and other affiliated businesses, a total of more than 20 defendants. The Colorado Coalition and the state of Colorado have prepared the MOU that you have in your packet today, which lays out the framework and the distribution of the settlement funds. That being said, none of the settlements have been finalized yet. So what we're going to present today is an overview of the MOU, which is more of a formality really rather than a policy discussion. So the main question for council today is, would council like to move forward with agreeing to receive settlement funds directly? And we do have a presentation.
Katie, can I share my screen, please? This is Kendall.
Yes, one moment.
Here we go. See. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah, thanks, Kendall. And next slide.
Right.
Great. So what does this framework look like? It will all start with the first entered settlement that will trigger the formation of the Abatement Council, probably early next year. The Abatement Council will ensure that the distribution of opioid funds complies with the terms of the MOU and will also be responsible for the oversight of opioid funds from the regional and the infrastructure share. So these are the primary roles, but there will be other roles too, such as serving as a facilitator between the different parties, including the City of Aurora, or developing a public dashboard to show how the settlement funds are used in the state of Colorado. The Abatement Council shall consist of 13 members. 7 members are appointed by the state. 6 members are appointed by local governments. One of the state members, there will be a non-voting chair, except for in the event of a tie. Eligible members for the Abatement Council are on the local government side are mayors, council members, county commissioners, or a professional with significant experience in substance use disorders. So if council is interested, there may be an opportunity for you to get involved directly here on a statewide level. Next slide, please. This slide shows the allocation of the settlement proceeds. There will be 4 different buckets. The City of Aurora may receive funding from 3 of the buckets. They are in bold on the slide. 10% of the settlement proceeds go directly to the state. 20% will go directly to participating local governments. The largest bucket is 60% that will go directly to regions, and 10% will fund specific abatement infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the local government share in more detail. About 1/4 of the local government share will go to the 3 county areas that Aurora is located in, the Arapahoe, Adams, and Douglas. The allocations are based on 3 factors: the amount of opioid pills dispensed in an area, the number of opioid deaths in an area, and the number of people suffering from opioid use disorder. So for example, 10.8% of the share will go to the Arapahoe County area, which will then be distributed to the county and the different municipalities within the county. Overall, the City of Aurora will receive 4% of the total local government share directly. So how much is that? Well, we don't know yet. We have some estimates, but there are more than 20 defendants with a wide range of potential settlement dollars, and payments are spread out over several years, 7 years, 10 years, 18 years, depending on each individual settlement. In addition, the settlement amounts will be higher the more local governments sign the MOU. So there are still a few unknowns here. And the city is expecting some movements on settlements in the next couple of months, but the first payment is not expected until 2022, potentially mid-year. Next slide, please. There will be a regional share making up 60% of the settlement funds. The regional map is shown in Exhibit C of the MOU. The City of Aurora will be a member of 3 separate regions, Arapahoe, Adams, and Douglas. Each region will create its own regional council. The governance structure has not been determined yet, but there will be local government representatives appointed to the regional councils. So there may be another opportunity for council to get involved on a regional level. The regional council will develop a 2-year plan identifying the use of funds by the region and make requests to the Abatement Council for opioid funds. The City of Aurora may receive funding through this regional structure, but it's really up to the regional council to make a plan to develop policies and processes in regards to how these funds are spent and or allocated to municipalities. Next slide, please. And then there's the statewide infrastructure share, 10% of the total settlement funds that will promote capital improvements and provide operational assistance for developing or improving the infrastructure necessary to abate the opioid crisis anywhere within the state of Colorado. It's up to the Abatement Council to establish policies and procedures for the distribution of those funds, including processes for local governments to apply for opioid funds from this share. So more to come on this one as well. And now Kendall Klacha will provide you with an overview of the approved purposes of the settlement funds.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So what are some of the things that this money could be spent on? Well, there are 7 pages of approved purposes for the funds. And so that could be anything from treatment to prevention and any other areas such as supporting first responders, research, things like that. The treatments could be counsel, inpatient, outpatient, maybe even for families this would be something that we might support existing programs in so that we could not have to start from the bottom up. But there are a lot of items on this list, so I encourage you to take a look at that. Some of the next steps for us would be to ask you if you are okay with us moving forward for formal approval. And then after that, staff can take a look at some existing programs that are currently here in Aurora, and then also with our other local agencies that we work with. Any questions?
Discussion? Any questions of staff?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Maybe I misunderstood. My understanding was that there was also a clause in there that allowed for payback. In other words, the city has incurred many thousands of dollars in expenses over the last couple of years dealing with the opioid crisis. That money has come out of our general fund. And I was wondering whether or not any of the money in the opioid agreement would allow the city to be paid back for the money that they've invested in this, this catastrophe over the years.
Isabel, is that something that we can speak to that?
Go ahead. Isabel, are you on?
I am. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This is Isabel Evans with the City Attorney's Office. There will be some limited purposes for which this settlement money can be used for reimbursement. However, the intent of the settlements and this agreement in particular is to really think forward in terms of abatement projects. So the vast majority of the funding is going to go to new projects or continuing to fund existing projects. There is some potential for reimbursement for certain acceptable expenditures, however.
All right, thank you.
Further questions?
Yes, Mayor.
Discussion? Mayor Pro Tem.
And I know this is just a memorandum of understanding to move forward. Of course, we want to, but when we're looking at the regional share versus the local share, and I know there'll be some crossover, when do you anticipate these committees to be formed? Maybe I missed that.
The Abatement Council will need to be formed 90 days, within 90 days of the first entered settlement, and the Regional Council will need to be formed within 180 days after settlement. Mm-hmm.
So when, I mean, is there an approximate?
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen, this is Isabel again. We don't have an actual date anticipated for the first settlement. We are very close, we believe, and I'm sure you've seen in the news, there has been some coverage that settlements are being negotiated, but we don't have a firm date for when those will conclude. And there are also still a number of defendants with whom there are no final settlements negotiated. So this will be an ongoing process that will continue likely for several years.
But you said first payment possibly mid 2022. So if that was the case, then it would be 90 days beyond that, or 180 for the regional beyond that. Is that right?
90 days after the Abatement Council started to form, and then give them some time to start paying out the local government share. So this is a very first estimate, mid 2022.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions of staff? Discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 4A forward? Seeing no objection, item number 4A will move forward. 4B, update on the evaluation and assessment of transportation road impact fees on development in the city. Cindy Collop.
Good afternoon, Mayor. This is Victor Rochelle with the Department of Public Works. Cindy Collop is unavailable this afternoon, and I'll be presenting for Public Works.
Very well. Just proceed.
Thank you. Presentation, one moment, please. All right, that's coming up for everybody, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Thank you. So again, Victor Rochelle, Deputy Director of Public Works. And with me today, I have Brian Duffney with EPS and Elliot with FHU. And we're going to be talking about the proposed update to the transportation impact fees. This was brought forward during the most recent budget workshop and asked to be advanced to study session for additional discussion. So the agenda for the presentation tonight, so we're going to cover the background, definitions, talk about the city growth, our typical transportation costs, then our proposed fees and the nexus for the study, eligible projects, maximum fees and how those were justified, impacts to the surrounding community, as well as fee credits for SREA and ARTA, and then finish up with recommended fees and phase-in options, open discussion, and then requests for some council direction. With that, I'll hand it to Brian for the next slide.
Thanks. And we're going to try to roll through a lot of this because you've seen some of this previously in the budget workshop, and we'll try to cut to the chase here. But you know, this process kind of started in 2018 with a major update to the city's impact fees. The decision was made at the time to defer doing the transportation fees until later, because the city was working on the Northeast Aurora transportation study and a new 5-year capital planning cycle. So there was going to be a better identification of project needs that would be applicable for impact fees, and updated costs as well, which is important. Next, please. Oh, actually, one more point on here. The impact fee nexus study, the purpose of that is to calculate the maximum legally justifiable fee based on the impacts that development creates on transportation in this case. And then, council has the discretion to adopt anything up to the maximum fee, or to provide a lower discounted option as well. And we're going to show you some recommendations on phase in and how we're treating the credits for SARIA. Okay, go ahead next. Again, these are impact fees are for capital. They're for capacity projects for transportation. They're not a general revenue source for maintenance, operations, or to raise the level of service. Basically, you can't charge new development for a higher level of service you're providing to existing development. We'll talk about processes and mechanisms for fee credits, we noted last time that affordable housing can be exempted from impact fees. Next, please. These are for capacity projects. So adding lanes, new roads, major intersection improvements. We've included costs for multimodal projects in here. So the full complete streets cross sections are eligible for impact fee revenue. Local roads and collector roads are not within the impact fee program. Those are typically developer responsibility. Next.
Great, thank you, Brian. So just going over some of the growth in the city. This information comes from census data. So we've seen, I think as everybody's aware, quite a level of growth within the city of Aurora, not just annexations, but we're talking rooftops and population growth. We have had transportation fees collected, and that's roughly around 8.7 million based on the current policies and procedures there for collection of those fees. If you look at that 8.7 million in transportation impact fees, and you break it down into the three core areas or three areas of the city, you have the core area, which currently, based on those allocations, is about 2.3 million, averaging a little over 193,000 per year. For the northeast section, 2.1 million, and for the southeast section, 4.3 million. Some of the things that the fees have been used for in the past, we used 175,000 for the Heather Gardens entrance, which included sidewalk improvements, traffic signals, ADA ramps, things of that nature. 50,000 was used for the Havana, Idaho turn signal. It's a traffic signal reconstruction or partial reconstruction. We used 360,000 for the Sand Creek light rail trail connections. That included sidewalk, ADA, pedestrian lighting along the corridor. We used 400,000 for a new traffic signal and new pedestrian facilities at Yale and Marina. $125,000 for a North Aurora traffic study, $200,000 for Montview and Fitz Parkway, again, pedestrian upgrades and traffic signals. And then supplementing into the signal budget, $1.1 million in 2018 and $1.6 million in 2019. As far as transportation costs, based on what we've seen and the current contractor costs, materials, et cetera, we're estimating a little over or right around $3 million per mile on an arterial roadway. And at our current impact fee rate of $667, it would take approximately 4,500 single-family homes needed to recover that type of cost. This slide is a little bit busy. What we have on the screen here is a list of all of the projects Public Works is identified as capital projects, including bridges, intersections, and roadways, the length of the project, the capacity it'll add to the network, and then the capital cost and the estimated cost per vehicle mile of capacity added. All in, the project down at the bottom you'll see in the red square is approximately $114 million. So if we're looking at that list of projects and we go and look at the $114 million, and based on our current impact fee of $667, we're looking at roughly 157 years to collect enough impact fees as it stands today to complete all of the projects. The smallest project on the list, First in Havana, at our current impact fee rate would take a little over 8 years. And to fund the Powhatan Road project in Southeast Aurora, which is a widening project, taking the road from 2 lanes to its full build, at the current impact fee rate will take approximately 28 years. Last, if we're looking at Jewel and Genoa and widening Jewel along that corridor up to 470, at the current rate, it would be 130 years. With that, Brian, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Victor. So I'm gonna get into the fee calculations and the recommendations now. Go to the next one. The fee is designed in a way that the fee payer only pays for the road capacity that they used. We're calculating based on a level of service D, which ensures that people aren't paying to sort of raise the level of service. They're just paying to maintain the system at a level of service D. And the fee revenue would be used on the major roadway system, which we've defined as the city arterial roads. I've said this before, multimodal cross-section, capacity projects. So the first adjustment to the fee we make after we've calculated that cost per vehicle mile of capacity is to take out some outstanding debt, which is a minor amount on Hogan Parkway. One of the principles and fees, you want to make sure you're not double charging. If someone's paying fees on one thing, they shouldn't be paying property tax debt on another type of project. Next one, please. These are a little bit jumping around a little bit, but from the last meeting, you'll recall we looked at which communities in the metro charge impact fees, and they are generally large, growing communities. And from this chart here, you see that even communities that aren't charging the full spectrum of capital impact fees are charging them on transportation. Transportation is one of the costliest items of public infrastructure that cities and counties provide. Next, please. And so we're going to so when you do the math on the cost per capacity and apply it to a couple of other factors on trip length and ship generation rates, you get at a maximum fee of about $5,800 per single family unit, about $4,500 per multifamily unit. And so that would be the maximum justifiable fee. But we've got a couple of recommended adjustments and phase-in options that I'm going to go through now. Next, please. And as we showed you last time, this would be a significant increase to the city's current capital impact fees. But the information that Victor presented in the first half of this slide deck, I think shows that the city, for a long time, really hasn't been recovering the cost of transportation infrastructure. And so it causes it to fall further behind on its capital project needs. and having to find other funding sources to supplement impact fees. Next, please. So on next, let's just. So when we look at credits, the two main things are credit for improvements built when if a fee payer, a developer, is building the types of projects that would be part of that major roadway system, part of the types of roads that the city would use would fund with impact fees, then there should be a mechanism for them to receive credit for that. I've mentioned double charging, and we're also accounting for debt and other funding sources. And so the other funding sources really comes in with the SARIA and the ARDA. They're special circumstances that we took a close look at. So next. So SARIA, if you've got acronym fatigue, is the South Aurora Regional Improvement Authority, formed a few years ago. It's a voluntary financing agreement implemented through an IGA between the city and 8 Title 32 metropolitan districts in Southeast Aurora. The SARIA imposes an additional mill levy that's dedicated to funding regional transportation projects. For the first 20 years, it levies 1 mill, and then there's a mechanism for that mill levy to ramp up subject to a number of conditions within the metro districts. They're trying to do about $89 million in project. Go ahead to the next one, which is a map, just to give you a visual of where we're talking about. You know, this is on the periphery of the city in Southeast Aurora, right? And so, you know, this is an area that's been developing ahead of the city CIP, and the SARIA was formed to help this area advance transportation projects that were needed in that area to provide regional connectivity. Next, please. So they're using the mill levy to do bond financing to fund those kinds of projects. You know, we took a close look at the types of projects that they are funding, and those are consistent with what we consider as part of this major roadway system in the impact fee program. And so we do recommend that a credit mechanism be provided for situations like the SARIA. We looked at the value of that mill levy over 40 years on an average new home, and it would be about $1,500 over that time period. So next, please.
Mayor, if I could ask a question real quick. Hey, Gruber.
Oh, Councilor Gruber.
So I just want to point out that you had talked about the Aurora Regional Improvement Mill Levy, and you said that was SARIA. I want to point out that ARI, the 1 mill for 20 years and 5 mills for 20 years after that, applies to every metro district in the city that's operating under, I think, the 2004 service plan. So it's not just SARIA that's collecting that. Every metro district in the city, and the exceptions, you're going to get into ARDA and Green Valley and some of those have agreed that they're going to charge 5% starting at the beginning. So I just wanted to point out that ARI is not solely restricted to SARIA. It's every metro district in the city.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 4B forward?
Yes.
Mayor, I think we have a lot more to go.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please proceed.
Unfortunately, I have a few more slides to get through. So, thank you, Councilmember Gruber. Yeah, so this credit would apply to situations where there is an ARI, not just the SARIA. We're using that example, I think, for simplicity here. So if you take out that mill levy credit, the single family home fee would go down to about $4,200. I will kind of circle this back in terms of what that means in terms of a recommended fee option. Let's tackle the ARTA next. Next slide, please, Victor. So ARTA is a different situation in our analysis. This is the area around the Aurora Highlands development along E470 and south of Denver International Airport. So ARTA is the Aerotropolis Regional Transportation Authority. Regional transportation authorities are a transportation funding tool authorized under state law. They can collect 5 mil property tax and sales tax as well. And what makes this a little bit, what makes this different is that it's also a funding and financing agreement, an incentive agreement really between the developer, the city of Aurora, and Adams County. So the ARTA also receives 100% of the city's use tax, excluding the $0.25 dedicated to public safety. And they also receive 100% of the city's impact fees. They get within their boundary, they collect all of the use tax that they generate, and they get to keep all of the impact fees that they pay into that project. Adams County has also invested half of the general fund property tax generated in that area and 100% of their road and bridge property tax. And that is in addition to the 5 mills that the RTAs can collect. And they're trying to do about $300 million in transportation projects. You know, this is, again, an area that's developing out ahead of the city CIP, and there is a vast amount of transportation projects needed to make that area function.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I know you're saying, you know, they got 100% of the use tax and 100% of the city impact fees, but had we not done that, would any of these roads be happening right now?
This is Jason.
I know the city has so much money. The answer is no, right?
No, the answer is yes. Some of the roads would be being constructed because they are developer responsibilities in some cases, and in other cases, they are, you know, more regional in nature. So part of the proposal when this came forward was to sort of expedite the overall construction of the roadway. So these roads would have been built, but just probably would not have been built as quickly.
But they would have been built, you just said, with some of them were developer responsibility, so it wasn't on the city.
Correct.
So I'm just, I guess I'm making the point that the developer was already paying for some of this, and then on top of that, with this ARTA being formed, they're advancing the, you know, completion basically of some of these roads without, I mean, yes, we're giving city use tax, but we're not putting money up front. And isn't this spurring development by having these roads done? Like bringing in job centers?
Yeah, I don't think that's a question I can answer. I think that would be something the developer would be better at responding at. But I think
maybe Mr. Batchelor could answer that.
So I think that is part of the value proposition from the developer, is that the transportation network would perhaps bring some job centers in. We've not currently seen that development occur yet.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, this is Dave Gruber.
Other questions? Councilmember.
Since I'm on the ARTA board with Councilmember Gardner, let me just bring out correct a couple of things. The $300 million in projects is closer to $440 million in projects. The developer is responsible for building one lane in each direction. ARTA is building the second and third lane on the road, so that we're preparing that the entire northeast area to, we're anticipating extensive growth up there. Council approved the Aerotropolis Parkway and renaming of the Aerotropolis Parkway last week. We talked about Piccadilly today. ARTA is going to expand, putting an overchange or an interchange at on Piccadilly I-70 is important, but if there's nothing for that road to connect to, then we have a problem. So ARTA is widening the road from I-70 all the way up to 56th Avenue. So Piccadilly is going to be a major thoroughfare. The Aerotropolis Parkway is going to be a major thoroughfare. The Aerotropolis, ARTA is putting an interchange at E470 and 38th, so that Tower Road will connect through the Aurora Highlands Parkway down to a new interchange going at I-70. So it's an extensive roadway that's going in there. Like I said, it's closer to 440 million in 2018 dollars, and I think that the Aurora Highlands is paying about 200 to 220 million of that. But Green Valley Ranch Aurora, which is being built adjacent to Green Valley Ranch Denver, is also a participant in ARDA, as is another tech center to the east side. And then there's other folks looking at it north of 48th Avenue. So it's ARDA is going to radically transform that portion of the city. Having said that, I'm concerned about the 5 mil property tax because I've read the slides in the backup. The 5 mils is similar to what we talked about with Saria, but the 5 mils in the ARDA area, that includes the Aurora Highlands and includes Green Valley Ranch, will start immediately. So instead of 1% for 20 years, it's going to be 5% for 40 years. So, which is a significant amount of money that each homeowner is going to have to buy. I want to make that point. I'm going to talk more later, but I want to make that point on this slide.
Further questions? Please proceed.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So this map might be a little dated, but at least gives you a general idea where we're talking about. So E470 is going down the middle there. 38th Avenue is the orange line in the middle going east to west. Next, please. So the consultant recommendation is that based on the public financing invested in the project, that a credit is not warranted. We looked at the use tax contributions that a typical home would pay, and those range from about $4,000 to $6,000 per home. And what that means is that's foregone revenue to the city. So, and a lot of the use tax goes into the capital projects fund, much of which is used for maintenance projects. And so the city now has to backfill those use tax contributions, the use tax that they would have received with other general fund revenues, other property tax, other sales and use tax revenue. And then the use tax contribution is about $4,000 to $6,000 on a home. And that is in many cases greater than what the impact fee would be if it were adopted at the maximum level. The other consideration is that because that project receipt is allowed to keep all of the impact fees paid within its boundaries, then there's nothing else left for the city to use for other capacity projects that might be sort of an indirect impact of the growth of that project. And then balancing that, the higher fees within the RTA could actually help the district by providing more revenue and help to accelerate its projects and pay off debt sooner. So our recommendation is that a specific credit would not be applied to ARDA. However, I want to show you the options that may be a moot point. So let's go to the next, please. Next, please, again. So two options that we're proposing. The first would be to adopt one uniform fee citywide. So that would be taking that maximum fee, netting out the ARI, acknowledging that is going to be more, that may be more common in future years. And so that would be that discounted level. I think it was $4,500 per unit, if my memory serves me correct. And then phase that in over 3 years, because we do recognize that would still be a substantial increase over what's being paid today. The second option would be a little more complicated to implement, but would be to offer developers choices. So if there is an ARI in their project, they would form and join the ARI and pay the discounted fee, or don't form the ARI, don't pay the ARI, don't form the ARI, and pay the full fee. And again, that would be phased in over 3 years. So go to the next slide, please. So
I ask a question on the slide that we're on.
Back up.
Yes, if you could back up. And actually probably back up even one further, because my question is on the use taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that for so every home built has to pay use taxes. It's building materials, right? Roofs and that type of thing.
Correct.
And so I know Southeast Aurora has generated tens of millions of dollars. So that money, did I hear, stays within its boundaries?
Yes, in the ARTA, the financing agreement with the city allows it.
Not ARTA. I'm just talking about, like, I'm in Southeast Aurora, not ARTA.
No, in Southeast Aurora, everywhere else in the city, that use tax goes into the general fund and the capital fund.
Okay, so
the capital project fund is funded with the transfer of the building material use tax.
But it doesn't stay in its boundaries.
No.
Right. So here's my point. I feel like my area gets taxed to death. So we have, Metro District taxes that funded the development, the interior roads, whatever. Then we have SREA on top of it. Then we pay use taxes. And if we're going to add on a greater impact fee, and we're supposed to be talking about affordable housing, this just adds more cost to each home built. And I already have complaints about Metro Districts charging too much. I don't like the plan. I don't like either option personally.
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
So just a clarifying question. So these fees can be waived for affordable housing development specifically, correct? That was already clarified at the beginning.
That's correct.
So can I do a follow-up to that?
Yeah, Pro Tem.
Okay, so they can be waived for affordable housing, but then the people that are buying homes in either Northeast or Southeast Aurora, where everything's being built primarily, as far as like single family homes, they're basically paying for all the roads. I mean, that's like the burden is on single family homeowners.
If I could clarify. So if the city gives a fee waiver, it can't make up the difference, by putting that additional.
No, you're not. It's not making up the difference. We're paying for the roads. We're paying for, if this plan goes into effect, we would be, this additional impact fees on top of the other fees all goes towards building roads that could be somewhere else in the city that even people that live down south don't even use. That's what I'm getting out of this.
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So these are also being charged in redevelopments, right? So if an area is being redeveloped into mixed use, or if new development is going into a blighted area, these fees would still be charged on those developments, except potentially exempted on any affordable units built in those developments. Is that correct?
Yes, and a nuance to this is that in a redevelopment situation, you would look at the net increase. So let's say there was easiest way. Let's say there were five units of housing, and it got redeveloped with 10 units of housing. There would be a net increase of 5 units, so the impact would be paid on those 5 units.
Mayor
Pro Tem.
So on the redevelopment, if it's multifamily, the fee is less, and you calculated that. I mean, I didn't get that part because there's more people in a multifamily using the roads.
It's per unit.
Calculated?
Sure, those are calculated per dwelling unit. So, an apartment building might have 100 dwelling units in it. Compared to a single family home, which is just one dwelling unit within that building.
Right, but there's more people in the multifamily, and the fee's lower.
But
is it per person?
No, it's per dwelling unit.
Per dwelling, okay.
And this is based on, transportation fees are based on trip generation rates. The previous impact fees we looked at were,
Right.
a lot of those were based on household size.
Okay, but redevelopment typically is happening in our city at TOD sites. And so transit or, oriented development, we don't have that in other parts of the city. So people are forced to use their cars. I guess, I don't.
Mayor?
I think Councilmember Cano.
Oh, yes, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Brian, I do have a question for a little bit of clarification here. In one of the earlier slides, you showed that we actually do not charge impact fees for any kind of non-residential development currently. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and is that going to change with your proposal here? Because obviously the slide that we're looking at is just for residential units still. Because I am concerned about residences carrying the burden, because commercial development also generates trips.
That's something we're going to ask for council direction on at the end.
Okay.
Right now, we're not currently proposing non-residential fees. And again, I would just reiterate that we're not, the policy decision to not charge commercial impact fees, it doesn't result in a higher fee on residential development. That would be illegal to do the calculation that way. It just means that the city is foregoing that revenue for policy reasons and has to find other funding sources to make up the gap.
So certain kinds of developments are not actually paying their own way, in other words. Thank you.
Can I follow up on that, Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, if I understood correctly, Councilmember Marcano's question. So the commercial, if we're not charging an impact fee on commercial, then, and you said that then residential is not making up for it, but they have to because that's the pot of money. So there's, if we were charging commercial, wouldn't we lower the residential impact fee?
No.
You said you can't do that?
The fee is calculated, the fee study is a nexus study. So it establishes the nexus between the impact of development and the cost that it creates. And so, residential generates a certain number of trips and that costs X dollars to recover that cost. Commercial develops.
But commercial, if you have 500 people working in a commercial center, aren't they using the roads for work to get there?
Yes, they are. And there are adjustments in, let's say you're talking about an office building. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but if you're talking about an office
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to look at fairness, kind of what Council Marcano said, just in terms of putting the burden on homeowners versus there's other users of the road.
Sure, it's just been a policy decision by the city not to charge commercial impact fees. I think for economic development reasons. The reasoning being they're trying to incentivize non-residential development, and so it's simply a policy decision.
Mayor, if I could follow up on that.
Councilmember Gruber. Councilmember Coombs, then Councilmember Gruber. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's just mine was actually a follow-up on what Councilmember Bergen was saying before. So I have to rewind a little. So in TODs, multifamily, there may not be as many trips generated in a TOD, but that doesn't mean that they would pay less. You don't calculate a TOD as generating fewer trips, so they still pay the same amount in the multifamily developments that would be in those TODs. Is that correct?
That's correct. As proposed here, we're proposing a simple fee structure citywide where multifamily would pay a uniform rate.
Okay. And then, sorry, Mayor, I had a couple of follow-ups.
Please proceed.
So in that case, maybe those folks are paying technically more than their share, but we have to get through, we have to have some kind of a fee structure that's predictable and makes sense. I guess my other question is, if we were to choose to charge commercial impact fees, could we choose to also charge less than the maximum fee on residential?
Yes, you can.
Councilmember Gruber.
So I just want to make 2 points. The first one is, especially in the Northeast area, we're seeing many warehouses go in. The traffic that we're seeing are freight trucks. Obviously, there are employees that deal with the freight trucks, but those freight trucks are, come in and out of Aurora. So I'm a little bit concerned, maybe we should be looking at some of those type of businesses as opposed to a shopping mall, but those businesses that bring in the heavy traffic for them to participate. The other thing I want to point out, or I'm a little bit concerned about, is that we're talking about new development, and I understood I support the impact fees that we created for new development to pay for their fire stations, police stations, libraries, parks, and so on. I think that in that case, growth pays its own way. I'm a little bit concerned here where we're developing new things across the city. Say, for example, the Southlands Mall. Southlands Mall does not only serve the people that are in the Southeast Aurora. People from throughout the city come to that mall. So, but we aren't charging someone from other parts of the city to come to that mall. Same thing with Corner Star. Same thing with some other developments. And we're going to see a lot more of that near the Gaylord when the entertainment centers go in, and some of the the large shopping centers and hospitals and things like that go into the area. So what I'm wondering is that I can see not applying an impact fee to residents that have been here for a long time, but would it make sense for us to consider an impact fee when a house sells and someone else moves into the city? Because when that new person comes into the city, that new person could go again to the various hospitals or things like that. So that new person could be charged the impact fee just like any other new person in the city. That's just a point. Let's carry on the conversation.
Further discussion?
Mayor?
Councilmember Cruz.
So I actually do have kind of a question and a follow-up on that. That seems like that would have to be kind of some type of like real estate transfer fee that would be would be categorized as an impact fee. Is that something that is permissible if we were to look at something like that?
Is that a question for the consultant?
Or attorneys, if you can answer it, great. If not, maybe.
I would defer to legal for that. Let's see.
And maybe that's a later on question. We can move on with the presentation. Sure. But I think that would be just something we'd have to find out.
Sure. So
Please proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so Victor, would you mind backing up just one? Get me back on my feet here. Okay, so this is the simple one fee citywide option. Next, please. This is the second option where there would be a different fee based on whether there's an ARI or not. And then next, please. I don't want to go through these in detail, but we've shown in the packet how they would be phased in if they were phased in over 3 years. You can skip to the next one, please. Next. And so, this is then the request from staff is should staff proceed with an ordinance for new residential transportation impact fees? We're happy to take more questions and discussion here. And then the second question is whether you would want us to come back with additional information on non-residential transportation impact fees.
I have a question on the comparison of the cities that was earlier. Was Denver, I didn't see Denver in that. Do they charge a transportation impact fee?
They do not.
Okay, because they're right next door to us. How about Parker and Centennial? They're right next door to us and they weren't in there.
Centennial has an older fee that was, I think, calculated many years ago, and it's a different methodology and it's older. Parker is and so it's lower than what we're showing here. Parker is a very interesting case. For years, Parker charged an excise tax, so sort of an additional sales tax on top of building permits per square foot. and they would use the excise tax revenue, a very flexible, much more flexible funding source than impact fees. It can be used for maintenance, for new capital. What they ended up doing was commissioning an impact fee study a couple of years ago that calculated impact fees. They repealed the excise tax, adopted impact fees, and then soon after had another ballot initiative that would repeal the new impact fees, which were calculated at a level similar to what we're talking about here in terms of transportation. They repealed the impact fees and replaced them with a higher excise tax.
Okay.
It's a complicated story. I hope I got it right.
And personally, I would like, I personally don't want to move forward on this. I would like to see a few more, some nuances in terms of, moving things around. And do you have any discussions with builders as to the impact of the housing costs? Like with the HBA or?
No, we have not. What we've looked at is what surrounding communities are charging. Especially I think surrounding communities closer to Southeast Aurora, Douglas County. I think Castle Rock has some of the highest impact fees in the region, and that certainly hasn't slowed their growth. We look at fees in terms of percentage of home price. If you're talking about a $500,000 home, let me do my math here. Let's just round numbers. If the total fees were 10,000 divided by 500,000, that would be about 2% of the cost.
Right. Well, and I guess my point on Denver not having one, because they're right by us. It just can't. I'd like to see more apples to apples with, the water tap fee, all the other impact fees that we have, because some of them had the transportation, but they didn't have the park impact fee, or they didn't have the library impact fee and that type of thing. And I just don't want to rush into a decision and then find out that we have hurt ourselves in terms of, of new housing development.
Right. I just have a question. It would seem that Denver has very little raw land left, that it's more redevelopment. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, and I think it would be harder for them to implement an impact fee program because they're going to have fewer capacity projects, fewer widening projects, and generally their transportation policy is increasing person capacity, not vehicle capacity.
Yes, but Denver has never, so they've never had an impact fee?
I don't know the answer to that. They may have historically, but I don't think so.
I mean, they do have homes in their area.
It's generally a tool used more frequently in growing areas. That's where the tool works the best, where you have places like Aurora, and the other large suburban communities that we showed on those slides is where the tool works the best.
Further questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
So I want to just close on the points that I had made earlier during the presentation. One, for those houses in Green Valley Ranch and in the Aurora Highlands that are paying twice the ARI mill levy as other metro districts, I think adding an impact fee on top, which is significantly different than would be applied to the rest of the city, would raise a question in fairness. I mean, when the city and the county negotiated the creation of ARDA, everybody put the money on the table as far as we'll offer this, and so on. To go back now and say, now we're going to go back and charge ARDA or homeowners, which are Aurora residents, by the way, Aurora residents who live in ARDA, significantly more than we would charge an Aurora resident, say going into the development on Buckley, just south of, or on Airport, or Buckley Road, just south of the base, or some of the other new developments. I just don't think that's fair. We negotiated in good faith, and I think that if we eliminate the ARI payment in one part of the city, we should eliminate it across. But I'd also like to explore the concept of applying this impact fee to new homeowner or to people who buy homes, existing homes, because frankly, the existing homes never paid an impact fee. If you go back and look at the history of Aurora and how we've charged for transportation over the last, well, you know better than I do, but look to see how we paid, many of the older homes or many of the neighborhoods throughout the city, very nice neighborhoods throughout the city have never paid a dime extra for transportation. And yet these people are going to use facilities throughout the city, and they're going to use these roads that are being paid for only by the new residents. So I think that the impact fee could be brought out in such a way as to affect, maybe charge more for new housing areas, and that I can certainly understand that. But to allow someone to buy a house across the street from a new development and pay zero, where the person buying a house, the new house, pays $5,000, just sounds like a lot.
If I could ask a question of the consultant, and that is, what other municipalities have a real estate transfer tax in the metro area?
Boy, in the metro area, I am not aware of any in the metro area that have them. It's all the ones that I know of are mainly mountain communities, mountain resort communities. When Tabor passed in the early 90s, it specifically outlawed new real estate transfer taxes. And so none have been adopted since then.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. So, Brian, I just want to clarify that the proposals that you have before us, this is more or less what it would take for us to absorb the real expected use of new residential development, correct? This isn't an arbitrary number. You've used formulas to arrive at these conclusions. All right. And this is actually really similar to what we do with Aurora Water, which is why our tap fees, I'm sure we all hear about them periodically, are high because it is expensive to bring that water in. It's very expensive to acquire new water rights. So I feel like what we're discussing here is a realistic approach of what we need to do if we're serious about being able to grow and sustain that growth. So I'm very grateful for this information, for this presentation. I think we should move forward with this. And I'd also like to consider additional information on non-residential fees as well.
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
So, Brian, you said that real estate transfer taxes were outlawed. I know sometimes fees are not covered under that. And so is there a distinction there, or would that most likely, I guess this is back to my question of our legal staff, of would a fee be permissible knowing that a tax was specifically outlawed for that same purpose?
I would defer to the city's legal team. There's a lot of discussion out there right now in policy circles about the distinctions between fees and taxes after the Aspen bag fee case. But how that would potentially apply in Aurora, I think is something you need to look into.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Is it possible, we do a lot of community engagement on almost every initiative that we bring forward in the city. I would love to get some feedback from the community, from the residents as to, what they think about adding impact fees, transportation impact fees. So could we do some outreach?
Is that a question for the consultant?
Maybe the consultant. Yeah. Have you done that before in other communities, or?
We have. We've convened small groups of home builders and developers and done that.
Well, and I meant residents as well, not just, I think it's important to get the home builders' opinion in terms of what they see, from an impact on impact fees, but also the residents.
Let me just say that, but this is a tax that our residents aren't going to be paying, so they're basically going to be opining on a tax that other people are going to pay.
Oh, on new, you mean new?
Yes. Right.
But people do move, like I might move to another house and then I would pay it, right?
No, that's only if we adopted some kind of real estate transfer tax.
No,
Oh, if you bought a new house, if you bought a new house. Yeah, if you bought a new house.
not only with the Saria,
Right,
I'm gonna also end up with the impact fee.
right, if you bought a new home, correct.
Yeah, well, there's new communities being built, and that's a possibility for a lot of people.
So,
People downsize and people go to bigger homes all the time.
okay,
So I would just like to have some community engagement.
okay. Further discussion? Okay. Then the question before us is, should staff proceed with an ordinance for new residential transportation impact fees? Discussion?
Mayor?
Councilmember Coombs?
I support this, you know, just based on the information that we've received and the understanding that really growth has not been paying its own way when it comes to roads. But I do also agree with the idea of, if an ordinance is going to be brought forward, having some community and stakeholder engagement in that process, because it is a big change.
Yeah. So if I can ask a consultant this question. So why is it because of the Gallagher Amendment that has preceded us as to why impact fees were not placed on commercial properties historically?
Great question. You know, I'll take a stab at it, and there are others in the room that might have more institutional knowledge than me, but my understanding is it's really just been a policy decision by the city, but to not charge them in order to incentivize non-residential development. Now, but the Gallagher Amendment, I think, was a consideration in that, you know, look with the fact that non-residential property does pay more in property tax than residential property. And in addition, things like retail do generate more sales tax.
Oh, okay. Okay. Further questions? If not, is there objection from having staff move forward?
Mayor?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
I object. I'm not saying I object 100%, but I object to moving forward right now because I would like to. What was that other option? Wasn't there something where you would come back with additional information?
The second, I think the second ask for direction is if council would like additional information on non-residential impact fees.
On non-residential. I would like more information not only on that, but also on, is there any way to lower that amount that you just came up with, you know, in consideration of the Saria, the ARTA? I mean, I don't think that credit's enough.
Okay.
I mean,
let me do this. Let me. I think let's address the first question and then we'll go to some additional ones. And the first question is, should staff proceed with an ordinance for new residential transportation impact fees? So let me gauge the support of that. Are there members in opposition?
Well, can I ask a question on this question?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Are we saying an ordinance, but not this particular plan? Because that's two different things. Like I might proceed with an ordinance for residential transportation impact fees, but I don't like this plan.
Mayor?
Consultant, let me hear from the consultant.
Well, I'm wondering if we ought to put the options back up on the slide, and that might help council weigh the different pros and cons here. So, you know, are there, of these options, is there one that council likes better and would like us to move forward with, such as option one?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So I guess the question is, so option one, I think the fee that you showed for the citywide fee just kind of includes a credit for the ARI, whether or not an ARI is assessed in that area. And then option 2 would require you to actually be paying the ARI to get that credit. Is that basically the difference between the two?
Yes, that's a great way to phrase that. Option 1 basically discounts the fee citywide for the amount of the ARI.
In that case, I would support option 2, that you have to get the credit. You have to pay for the amount to get the credit for paying for the amount.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem?
Okay, so I'm just looking at option 2. So join ARI and pay the discounted fee. Pay the full impact fee and do not join. So they have the option of either one or the other. I think I like 2.
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Okay, so let me just go over some points. When a developer decides to build a neighborhood, they pencil out the costs and then they pencil out the revenue. And part of the revenue is at the house price and what that house price is. Based on that, they go to the financial community and take out a loan. For example, ARDA took out a $65 million loan last Friday. So the cost of the house and anything that impacts the cost of the house is very important because those people that are buying the bonds, in this case from ARDA, look at the projected revenues and the projected costs. So if we go in unilaterally and impose a $5,000 fee, which will either jump the price of every house $5,000 or reduce the sale price or the money, the profit on the house $5,000, that has a significant impact on bonds. It's not a trivial issue. Again, in a $65 million deal, that would have affected underwriting, it would have affected everything while ARDA did that development. As far as the ARI is concerned, ARI is in our service plan. So when the service plan, when the city adopted service plan, I think back in 2004, 2008, the ARI was part of that. So it's not a question of will they pay, it's if they put a metro district up in the city of Aurora, they shall pay. The question that the neighborhood has, or the metro district has, is will they use the money that they're collecting in the ARI to build their own infrastructure, or will they team with others? And that's where the metro districts in the southeast decided to do that. But keep in mind, that's only the metro districts that were formed after 2004. So those metro districts, the older metro districts, say the Eagle Bend metro district, which was formed before that time, never had an ARI. So again, we're imposing a cost that may or may not be considered fair across the city. And then, like I said earlier, everybody who pays an ARI should get credit for the ARI because it's not double imposing a fee on Green Valley Ranch is simply not fair. I mean, that we negotiated, the city and the county negotiated with those metro districts in good faith, and to say that the city and the county were going to contribute, but to go back now to not the metro district, but the future Aurora residents and to say you're going to pay an ARI of $3,000, $4,000 at 5 mils for 40 years. You're going to pay that ARI and you're going to pay an additional fee on top. It's very disconcerting. It's just not fair from a business perspective. The final point I want to make is that the beauty of an ARI over a long period of time is that the infrastructure that's being bought with the ARI, in other words, the plumbing, the roads, the water going in, the sewage, drain water, all of that infrastructure is 40-year infrastructure. So having it paid for over 40 years, you can make a good argument that paying over 40 years makes sense, as opposed to making the first buyer pay for something that's going to be there for 40 years, having people who move out, move in, having the new residents pay when they move in for their share of 5, 10, 20 years of using the drainage and the sewage and the water and so on, makes sense. Making the first buyer pay that adds a cost to the first buyer that could make a house prohibitive. So just a few points. That's why I'd like to go out and get some more comments on this.
Okay.
Developers, and even if we ask some of the people that have moved in to some of the new metro areas to say, if there was a $5,000 charge on top of what you've already paid, would you apply? And
Okay, let me ask this question, and that is, should we give members time to really digest this and defer this to the next study session meeting, which I think is November 1st, and give time to ask questions of the consultant and our staff. Does that make sense?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
I honestly would like that. I'm not saying redo the whole presentation, but I would love to have some time just to talk to some metro districts and some builders and some residents myself before making a big decision like this.
Further discussion? Is there objection to, we wouldn't require another presentation, would be an opportunity to ask questions of the consultant and the staff, and give members time to really look at this, to really think about different options, and to bring it back on November 1st. Is there objection? Seeing none, then we will defer this until November 1st and place it on the study session agenda for that date.
Thank you, Mayor.
Item number 4C, Civil Service Commission vacancy. Katie Rodriguez.
Yes, Mayor and council members, this is to provide information regarding the recent vacancy on the Civil Service Commission and to review some proposed schedules and processes. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we have one current vacancy right now, AJ McDonald, the vice chair. It was effective September 8th, 2021. The next vacancy is going to occur February 2022. It'll be Jim Weeks, the chairman. The Civil Service Commission should be composed of 3 members, but not more than 5. So we currently have one vacant seat. The proposed steps would be the application process. Communications will advertise for the open position. The city clerk's office will receive the applications, make sure that they meet the minimum qualifications. The application and the background check process was updated to comply with the request from council during the June 21st study session. So on the application that's in your backup, we did include a notification and acknowledgement about a criminal background check. The verbiage on the application was updated to include this notification, acknowledgement of the background check process, so the applicants were aware that that is going to happen if they are chosen to be interviewed. This was reviewed by HR in the city attorney's office and the city clerk's office, and it's the same process that we use for city employees. Employment history, we added the previous 3 employers and the reason for leaving was added to the application, as well as the conflicts of interest question. And then step 2 would be the ranking process, where you would submit your rankings and then it would be reviewed during the regular council meeting to determine who would be interviewed. And so step 3, this is the new step in this process, background checks. So all finalists selected to be interviewed will undergo a criminal background investigation. This step will be conducted after the ranking process is complete and will be done for all of the applicants that were chosen to be interviewed by council. The applicants will have the opportunity to provide clarification or an explanation of anything that came up on their background report during their interview process. And so if anything does come up, the city clerk's office will notify council and let them know that there was something on their background check. The interview process will be done during a study session. And the allotted time for each interview will be determined after the amount of people to be interviewed will be selected. The appointment process, the motion to appoint applicant will be done during the regular council meeting. And so here's a proposed schedule. So this is an overview of the schedule if council wishes to appoint a commissioner before the new council members are sworn in. It's a really aggressive schedule, but it's the best that we could come up with if we were going to do it before the December 6th council meeting when the new council members are sworn in. So it would be the application process. We could start advertising as soon as tomorrow. We would need to upload the new application to the website and provide communications with it as well. First thing in the morning to start advertising. October 29th would be 11 days, and that's the application due date. So applicants would have about 11 days to submit an application. Council would have approximately 5 days to review the applications and submit their rankings. And the November 8th council meeting would be when council could choose who they would like to interview. We would do the background check process in between the interview process and the ranking process. And November 15th study session is when we could do the interviews. And the appointment process would be November 22nd. If council would like to begin the appointment process after the new council members are sworn in, we could start advertising October 29th, and the application due dates could be around November 30th. They would give the public a month to apply if they would wish to instead of 11 days. And then the December 20th regular council meeting, that is when council will approve the new 2022 city council meeting calendar. So that's kind of when they would be able to determine how they would like to move forward with appointing this vacancy. And so just any feedback from council, questions, how you'd like for staff to proceed with the application process?
Discussion on the two options.
Mayor, can I just ask a question?
Councilmember Lawson.
Katie, I just had a question. Maybe you can jog my memory because I'm looking at the backup. For the consumer information, are we looking, was that to look for conflicts of interest or just, are we looking at people's, debt?
No, that's just for the criminal background check. So that is what we have to provide the applicants. That way they know that we're going to do a criminal background check.
Okay, so it's just for the criminal, it's not for credit checks and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Gardner.
I think that we need to move forward with filling the vacancy that we have now because of the, I guess I would use the word dire staffing situation in our civil service with police and less so with the fire department. I don't want to be in a position where we do not have a quorum. And, we have one term ending here coming soon. And, we don't know what else is going to happen with other commissioners. So my opinion would be we move to fill the vacancy now. I mean, frankly, it's been vacant for several months and we should have done it well before now, but here we are. But that all being said, I think we should move forward with filling that vacancy now because I don't want to be in a position where the Civil Service Commission doesn't have a quorum and can't fulfill their duties to fill academies.
Mayor. We can't hear you, Mayor.
Let's see. Councilmember Coombs and Councilmember McConnell.
So yeah, respectfully, we couldn't fill a vacancy already with our current council as it's composed. So my concern would be that we end up in that same situation. So my recommendation would be that we give time more than 10 days for applicants to apply. And also that we wait until we have a full council so that if there is a tie, it can be broken.
Okay. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I want to echo what Councilmember Coombs said, and I'm also curious, staff, have we had any attendance issues with our remaining commissioners?
Councilmember McConnell, I'm not aware of any attendance issues that hasn't been brought to my attention from the chairperson.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'll just reiterate that I think we should just wait until we have a full council.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Lawson.
think it was me.
Oh, Councilman, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. Who is left on our civil service at this point? I'm looking at this. What's
So
on
we
the
have
screen?
Jim Weeks as our chairperson. We have
And he's
Banna
leaving.
Smith, Harold Johnson, and Brooke Gabrielli. So we have 4 members currently, and we have 1 vacancy.
1 vacancy.
And the effective date.
I thought there was going to be another one.
In February 2022, the chairperson, his term is ending in February 2022. So as of right now, we just have the vice chair who resigned September 8th.
Okay. I mean, I think we should fill it. I agree with Councilmember Gardner. It's been a long time that we've had that vacancy. It's a really important commission, and if someone is absent or if they're ill or whatever and can't make the meeting, it just makes it much more difficult for the others.
Further discussion.
Mayor Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
I tend to agree, based on public safety and based on the size of the academy classes that we're trying to start to create, both within the police and fire department. We need somebody sooner rather than later. To be fair, we had a major debate about 1 member of the commission, but for the most part, our votes have been unanimous or nearly unanimous. So I think that we could bring, if we had a few candidates that we could bring forward sooner rather than later, again, so that they can start ensure that we have a quorum, that would help us out.
Okay, further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
Yes, I think it's been roughly 6 weeks by my calculation that we've had this vacancy. I'm not sure that that's an extremely long time, in fact, but also getting a more representative sample of applicants that represent the community can take time, and I think it's worth taking that time. Rushing it through in 10 days doesn't seem like taking that time to make sure that everybody knows and that different methods of outreach can be used.
Okay, further discussion, and I'm going to get a sense of the council on the Gardner proposal. Mayor Pro Tem.
And I don't want to name any names, but I have heard that someone's going to leave soon.
Further discussion.
That would leave 2 vacancies.
Further discussion. Seeing none, is there objection to the Gardner proposal to proceed prior to the new council being sworn in?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
I object.
Councilmember McConnell objects. Further objection?
Coombs.
Councilmember Coombs. Further objection? Then we will move forward. The direction is to move forward with the faster process whereby a new member of the Civil Service Commission would be selected prior to the new council being seated in December. With that, let's see, the time is now 8:27. I'd like to take a break and reconvene at 8:35. We will reconvene. Council will stand in recess until 8:35. Council is now back in session. Item number 5A, Aurora Mental Health Funding Ordinance. Velasquez.
Yes, and the proposed ordinance is sponsored by Councilmember Gardner, and I'll turn it over to him for presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So what you have in your packet is a result of several months of stakeholder outreach to address the mental health crisis in Aurora. I think, I don't need to tell everyone it's been a serious issue for a long, long time, and I think the last 18 months or so of the COVID pandemic have only made the situation much, much worse. There's really two separate pieces to this ordinance. One is the creation of the board. The board would be the group responsible for making funding decisions at the direction of council, with the approval of council. And then in addition to that, there is also a one-time funding mechanism using $10 million of ARPA money. And where this came from, I think we're in a unique position with the ARPA money available to cities to really make transformational decisions. And I think, we've kicked around the idea of funding mental health for a long time in our city. And I think, this really allows us to do that from a one-time perspective, and then in the future look for ways, either budgetary or other funding mechanisms to continue funding these programs after we're able to determine if they're successful or not. I do have some folks online that would like to say a couple words. We have Dr. Sandra Frisch from, and I might have gotten her last name wrong, from Children's Hospital, as well as Zach Dowd.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Sandra Fritsch. I'm a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. My clinical role and why I'm here is I'm the medical director of all the pediatric mental health clinical activities at Children's Hospital of Colorado. I'm also serve as the medical director of COPCAP, the Colorado Pediatric Psychiatry Consultation and Access Program. I've been in Colorado working at Children's Hospital as the medical director since the summer of 2016. On behalf of Children's Hospital Colorado, we want to thank you for the work that you're doing to prioritize mental health. We strongly support the proposal under construction tonight to target existing federal funds for expanded access to mental health services in Colorado and in Aurora. To fill you in on a little bit about what my experience is and what we're seeing at the hospital, as you're probably aware, in May, Children's Hospital Colorado declared a state of emergency for the pediatric mental health due to a 90% increase in demand for children and youth needing mental health services over the past 2 years. I'm sure you're aware that suicide's the #1 cause of death for children ages 10 to 24 years of age, and that's been that way since I arrived in 2016. In most other states, accidents are the leading cause of death. At any time, we rank 5th to 7th in the country for youth death by suicide, and we've had a child as young as 9 intentionally die by suicide. There have been many weeks in 2021 that the #1 reason for kids presenting to our emergency department is a suicide attempt. In April of this past year, the hospital experienced the highest ever volume for psychiatric patients presenting to the emergency department. And this was also a peak month for the COPCAP program, where we support pediatric primary care providers to be able to respond to the mental health needs of the pediatric patients. My work with primary care has revealed that the mental health needs have risen dramatically, and many feel ill-equipped to address the concerns in primary care. The severity of those suicide attempts have also increased, with more kids needing treatments in our pediatric intensive care units. And unfortunately, the beds are limited in number, and so kids have actually been staying longer in the emergency room waiting for that intensive care bed as well. This has gone far beyond crisis levels. Children, families, schools, healthcare facilities are all at their breaking points. We're also seeing an exodus of folks leaving because they're so overwhelmed. These challenges, they're not going to go away as the pandemic subsides. Kids have been dealing with the chronic stress for the past 19 months, And that's really interrupted their normal expected developmental trajectory. They're spending more time indoors behind screens. There's weight gain, there's low vitamin D levels, and extremely poor sleep, which is also a risk factor for mood and anxiety. So how this money can help, with the generous support from many community donors, Children's Hospital has been working to increase our mental health inpatient, outpatient, and day treatment services by more than 50%. We're expanding to create more space for patients who need the services, but it's not enough. And as we expand access to inpatient and outpatient care, we're also working hard to recruit mental health providers, which it's its own challenge. There's extreme workforce shortages in this profession at all levels of care, from psychiatrists to psychologists to therapists. We can't build our way out of this. We need to intervene prior to the crisis by supporting our community and school-based providers. We need to increase home-based resources so that the crisis does not escalate to the point of needing inpatient treatment. Currently, Colorado lacks a robust behavioral health system. Kids are often not able to be served in the right place at the right time. We have kids overstaying in the emergency department for days on end, staying in inpatient beds beyond needing to be there because there's no place appropriate for them to discharge. So City Council has a great chance to invest in a system that will better serve Aurora's citizens, including children and youth, by investing the ARPA funding in behavioral health resources. And we strongly support the approach that Aurora is taking to prioritize these funds for behavioral health, and also really want to give you our thanks for considering this. So thank you very much for this opportunity to chat.
Thank you for that. I want to mention briefly or talk briefly about the ARPA money. As you all got in your backup, and then I believe there was some correspondence sent to council as well. There's a very large stakeholder group that's worked on this, and in addition, our state mandated mental health provider here in the city of Aurora, we have sent them the latest draft of the ordinance, and they indicated via email their support of the effort as well to increase mental health funding to the city. And I think for the ARPA money specifically, it's important to point out when we received the presentation 2 weeks ago from the feedback from our citizen survey, the number 2 item listed for desired use of funds from our residents was increased mental health funding in our city. And so I think our residents really agree and recognize the issue that's in front of us and the opportunity that we have to fund mental health in our city. I'm not sure if Michael Ruddick is on the phone from Healthier, but if he is, Michael, do you want to say a few words?
I am, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Ruddick, Policy Manager with Healthier Colorado. We have over 8,500 members in Aurora, and we focus on improving health outcomes for Coloradans through state and local policy. Thank you to Councilor Gardner, Mayor, Council for hearing us tonight. Thank you to Dr. Frisch as well. Healthier Colorado supports the ordinance before us today. It's a really incredible opportunity to use ARPA funds to invest in upstream preventative services that promote better mental health and quality of life for all Aurorans. Across the country, we're seeing a mental health emergency. Colorado is not immune to that. And COVID has played a really big part in exacerbating mental health effects, like increasing social isolation, increasing economic worries and stress, and deepening existing mental health disorders for many. So I think it's fairly appropriate that we're having this conversation about, spending these ARPA funds in lieu of how COVID has exacerbated mental health issues. Colorado has the 6th highest suicide rate in the nation. It changes a little bit from year to year. More Coloradans died from drug overdoses in 2020 than any year ever on record. Child mental health service needs jumped by almost 100% in 2020. And the thing is that data is consistent in Aurora. So according to data from Tri-County Health, suicides and overdose deaths in 2018 and 2019 were at the highest recorded levels of the decade. That was before COVID. Nearly half of seniors in Aurora think that available mental health services are either fair or poor. A third of students in Arapahoe, Adams, and Douglas counties said they felt sad or hopeless every day for multiple weeks at a time. In Aurora Public Schools saw a 150% increase for behavioral health services at school-based health centers from 19 to 20. So this ordinance is a much needed direct, quick infusion of funds to address mental health behavioral health, suicide, substance use. We'll create more resources for schools, community organizations, healthcare providers, faith-based orgs, and other folks that are on the ground doing this work. And best yet, I think it's a really simple and straightforward model. So the spending will be divided into 5 main buckets: mental health services for children, seniors, veterans, and the unhoused, substance use disorder treatment and prevention, suicide prevention, restorative justice programs, and non-policing models for mental health responses. It's intended to be driven by the community. So a 9-person board with 2 non-voting city councilors, which would consist of mental and behavioral health experts, including those with lived experience, would be appointed by the city council and city manager to make sure that the money is spent by Aurorans and for Aurorans through a competitive grant process. That board would be subject to open meetings oversight, and city council would have final approval before that money is dispersed. The money that goes out the door for those preventative treatments would be priorities that come from the community. So there are provisions in the ordinance that would ensure community engagement, identifies the top spending priorities, reporting and auditing requirements that ensures transparency in who receives funding, what they used it for, the success of the program, et cetera. This ordinance is a really amazing opportunity to invest proactively in mental and behavioral health in Aurora, to invest in community organizations, to build trust and support for the community. And I think it's indicative that we have 20 plus endorsing organizations, as Councilor Gardner said, that support this ordinance, including Tri-County Health, Mental Health Colorado, American Academy of Pediatrics, One Colorado, and many, many more. I want to extend a very deep thank you to Councilor Gardner for his vision and leadership on this issue. Aurora will be happier and healthier if we can secure services for residents moving forward. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you all have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Councilmember Gardner, are you open for questions now, or do you still have more for your presentation?
There's one last presenter, Zach Saslow from Children's. Do you have a couple of brief comments before we open up for questions, Zach?
Thank you, Councilman Gardner and Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, and members. I will be brief. First, I want to echo the thanks, Councilman Gardner, for your work on this. I think Dr. Fritz laid out a really compelling vision, unfortunately, of the desperate challenges that so many of our children, youth, and families are facing in this community. And I thought Michael did a good job of sort of laying out the nuts and bolts of the solution. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about the problem or the solution that you have in front of you. I guess I would just put a finer point on their testimony and say we need action at every level, local, state, and federal. We in Aurora cannot wait for the feds to come in and save us, or even for state lawmakers to come in and help this community. This measure that you have before you tonight presents an opportunity to take solutions into our own hands in this community. Children's Hospital Colorado is supporting this measure because, as Dr. Fritz said, we don't want children to have to come to our inpatient beds or our emergency department. If they do that, then the system in this community has failed them, and we're overflowing right now, which is indicative of where we're at. We want those kids to be able to stay with their families whenever possible and stay closer to home, sleep in their own beds every night. So the measure that you have before you tonight is not a complete solution, obviously, but it is a significant step in the right direction. And I would just urge that the time to take matters into our own hands as a community is now. We should not wait. Things really are that dire. They are at that point. So with that, appreciate the indulgence. I know the hour is getting late, but I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Gardner, are you prepared for questions now?
Yes, please, Mayor, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'll start with the first question, and that is, the last time you brought this forward, and this is my question to Zach from Children's Hospital, it was never approved by the board. Has it been approved by the board this time? Because I talked to your board chair, Bart, Bart Whittam, and he was not aware of it last time you brought it forward. Is he aware of it this time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a great question. He is aware of it. And what I would say is, in general, the hospital's board does not engage in decision-making around specific policy priorities.
And how do you represent them?
Well,
if they didn't vote, if the board didn't vote on this position, how do you represent the board?
It's a good question, sir. I'll give you one example. At the state legislative level, not looking at local governments, not looking at stuff in Wyoming or Washington, D.C., we track north of 120, 130 bills every session. It just would not be manageable for our board of directors that is responsible for broad, high-level fiduciary responsibilities, et cetera, to take positions on each of those 100-plus pieces of legislation.
So they can't be bothered.
I'm sorry?
No, they can't be bothered, I see. Please proceed.
Mayor, Councilmember
Please
Hills.
proceed.
Councilmember Hills. I was just going to say, what I can tell you very clearly, and I want everyone to hear this, is our board is absolutely in the loop with regard to the challenges that we're seeing in our institution, in our community, and around the country with regard to mental health. They're absolutely on board with the fact that this is a dire situation. And again, solutions are needed from elected officials at every single level, federal, state, and local. So yes, our board is on board with that, and it's my job to represent the organization's position.
Okay. Let me say this, that your regional facility, and I appreciate all the work you do, Aurora Mental Health is not supportive of this, and I'm sorry that there was a mix-up and they cannot be presenting tonight. They will be presenting on October 1st their plan, what they want to see. And what they want to see is that this is one-time money, and they want to use to create the campus that they've already briefed us on. They wanted it going in that direction. And they take care of young people in Aurora as well. Further questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Gruber, then Councilmember Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm concerned that the minutes from the Management and Finance Committee are not attached in our package because we discussed a lot of this. The point was made earlier that the Children's Hospital is a regional hospital. It does wonderful, wonderful work. But if you go, and I just checked it again, if you go to the Children's Hospital website and look for the word Aurora, it's nowhere on there. I mean, we're delighted to have the hospital in Aurora, but it's not an Aurora hospital. And the money that we would take from Aurora to give to the Children's Hospital would not be dedicated to Aurora children. It would be dedicated, or it would go into a bigger fund. I think that the money that should go to the hospital should come at the regional level, at the county level, and state level. Certainly, we would support that. But again, it's not a regional hospital. The second thing, and to emphasize what the mayor had talked about, what Aurora Mental Health, which does focus on Aurora, intended to do or intends to do with the $10 million, or at least they asked, I think we all received an email this morning talking about the $8 to $10 million ask. They've purchased a piece of land directly across from the Medical Center of Aurora, which already has a building. They're going to tear that building down and then build an entire campus for mental health, supporting the people of Aurora. Everything from battered women to homeless to children, the entire suite of mental health services. So, and furthermore, we had another discussion earlier about using the ARPA money and making sure that we go through a process to vet the many requests that are there. So in this case, I'm just concerned that we discussed it at Management and Finance. We identified the fact that it's a regional hospital. The board itself, I have trouble with, given the fact that the responsibility for allocating the funds in the city of Aurora should always be on the elected officials. So to create a board that would then distribute the funds or even bring that forward, I just have a problem with. That's a city responsibility. Maybe have input, but certainly not have the power to allocate anything. So I do not support this. I look forward to having Aurora Mental Health brief us, and I look forward to a more nuanced process where we look at all of the requirements coming in for ARPA funds and apply them as best we can.
Councilmember Hills.
Thank you. My comment was only to earlier about the board not necessarily weighing in. It sounds a lot like our Pfizer committee, where we have a committee that takes positions on behalf of the full council, and then when it needs to, it comes to the full council, and there are updates and briefings. Was all because I think that the line of questioning was trying to make it sound like, you know, this was going behind the board's back, and I'm assuming that that was not the case, and it sounds very much like how we here at the city operate. And I just wanted to share that, but that was two comments ago now. So, but thank you.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Gardner.
So a couple of things. First of all, the money is not earmarked for Children's Hospital, and that was discussed at Management and Finance, and I guess the minutes should have been in there because that would have reminded Councilmember Gruber about that conversation. If you read through the ordinance, in fact, there's a process for community organizations to apply for this money, so it's not money that's dedicated for Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital obviously has a vested interest in improving health conditions, and I don't want to speak for them in our city, which is why they're involved, but this is not a way to send money to Children's Hospital. Secondly, as far as the approval of the money, so the board makes recommendations, and final approval authority still rests with council on this. So that's a key difference from what's been done in Denver and in other places where the elected officials do not have that accountability. That was something that was important for me to have here.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So a couple things. First of all, Councilmember Gardner, I do thank you for having that board structure with council approval. I think that's a significant improvement over previous proposals that have been brought before us for taking this to the ballot, which it's my opinion that for the ongoing program aspect, that's really the approach that we need to take. And so this ordinance establishes an ongoing program with one-time funds and doesn't identify where a minimum of $2.5 million a year would come from. And so that's concerning because we as a council have voted down things for 1/10 of that amount and less of not having identified the ongoing funds. That is a concern to me that we create an ongoing program with these one-time funds. I do think we absolutely need to allocate funding for these priorities, and maybe even with this board structure as a short-term kind of temporary, how we're going to allocate those funds, because I think we could use help figuring out who's bringing in what mental health specific requests. Now, right now, we've had about $20 million of requests around mental health for $60 million. And that doesn't even include setting aside some for leveraging partnerships with other levels of government or other types of entities. So I want to see us allocate money to mental health. I want to see us allocate probably some of it to this type of program, some of it to the ask from Aurora Mental Health that we'll hear, and some of it to leveraging partnerships. So I think we need to get all of those asks together and then decide how much of the money is going to that. Because I agree, we absolutely have to spend on this issue. It's a huge issue, as everyone has mentioned. This just isn't, I think, the way to do it with ARPA money, because our staff specifically recommended that because these are one-time funds, we use them for one-time purposes when we were in our budget workshop talking about the ARPA funds. So yes to allocating funds, no to creating an ongoing program with ARPA funds.
Further discussion.
Yes, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, for me, and I acknowledge that we have a serious problem with mental health illness, and it's just, what's the best way to deal with it? And I know we have this other proposal to use one-time funds for a campus, which I personally like that concept a lot. We're not experts in mental health, and that Aurora Mental Health, that's exactly what they do. I have always said that how am I going to phrase this? That we're not a county, so we don't have health and human services under our purview. And we have 3 counties, Douglas, Arapahoe, and Adams. I think Councilmember Coombs also alluded to, leveraging monies, and I think that's a really good idea. But really, they should be the one really looking at this program and then having us partner with them. That is their responsibility, Health and Human Services. And so I also have an issue with the ongoing monies. I think that's problematic. I think it's very complicated with this number of people on the board and how we're going to allocate. I would like us to, and I also thought that we, at the last discussion, study session, I thought we were going to look at all the needs of the city. I mean, there's infrastructure needs that we can spend ARPA monies on, and housing needs and so forth. There's a lot of needs. And I would rather see all of it before making a decision on one program.
Further discussion. Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. So Councilmember Gardner and most of the people here on the call know how I kind of feel about this. I met with most of them. I was very concerned. My issue is I would like to hear what our mental health agency has to say about this proposal. And they're not meeting until the end of the month. And so for me, that's why I'm not going to be for this. I agree with what a lot of my colleagues have said about the ongoing funds. But for me, I really want to know what they think about this proposal. So Councilmember Gardner already knows that. So does everyone else on this, the people that were here, Zach and I'm sorry if I missed your name. He was on the call as well. That was one of my issues. I brought this, Councilmember Gardner has headed this in some ways, but I have too. And, when I brought the proposal together in January, everybody was against it. So I am very much for mental health. I do believe we need to do something on all levels, but I do think that our mental health agency really needs to chime in on this proposal. So I will not be supporting this as is for tonight.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I think we are all in agreement about the urgent need to address mental health in the city. I think that this discussion gives me hope that we can find a way to actually move forward in the future. But I do want to echo a lot of the comments that my colleagues have made about using one-time funds for ongoing expenses. And frankly, I am also partial to the campus plan that was presented to us some time back. So I would like to see us bring this, include this in the conversation when we're looking at opportunities to leverage, funding to address mental health issues in the city, but also how we can create a ongoing revenue, source of revenue for this kind of programming in the future. I really do like the committee structure for the most part that you laid out in here, Councilmember Gardner. I think that having community representation and input is very important. But for the reasons outlined by my colleagues, I will not be supporting this version of it, but I'm hopeful that we're getting closer to one where we can all agree.
Seeing none, is there any opposition to the Gardner proposal? I believe Councilmember Lawson, Councilmember Coombs, Councilmember Bergen, Councilmember Gruber, myself, and Councilmember McConnell are in opposition to having it move forward at this time. With that, a majority have arisen in opposition. So item number 5A will not move forward. Item number 5B, a proposed amendment.
Mayor, I'll still use my prerogative to bring this forward to a full council meeting. All my colleagues are saying that we need to do something, and they've been saying that we need to do something for 2 years, and I haven't seen the other proposals. So this will be coming forward to the floor for a formal vote.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I think that's interesting that you heard from most of your colleagues on council, and you're going to bring it forward for a vote on the floor when I think there was some openness to you know, looking at this in conjunction with other proposals that are coming forward. I mean, basically, it's like, okay, let's give $10 million, plus we don't even know where the ongoing is. And then that right away takes a piece of the pie away from the rest of the ARPA funds. And it's, I just think it's really not considerate to let us consider the other options and weigh those first.
Mayor?
Councilmember Hills.
Thank you. I support moving this to the floor, and with all due respect, the mayor is consistently bringing competing proposals to the floor after they are voted down, and we are not calling him out in the same way. So it does seem very targeted towards Councilmember Gardner and perhaps some of the opposition from outside actors that is inspiring the discontent with moving it forward, because this is something that has been consistently supported when the mayor has done it in the past. And I just want to make sure that we are being fair in allowing council members to bring something to the floor and not calling them out individually and picking and choosing, because I know many on this council have supported doing just this with competing proposals as recently as a week ago or one study session ago, when Councilmember Coombs brought something forward, and rather than working with her, decided to bring a competing proposal. So I just, let's just be mindful that this is not something that's new and unique.
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So I fully support, Councilmember Gardner using his prerogative. I do hope that should it continue to not be supported when it comes to the floor, that there's an opportunity to work with the stakeholder group about what an ARPA request could look like that's in conjunction with all of the other ARPA requests that we're receiving on mental health. Because again, I think we need to use ARPA funds for mental health, and we need to use ARPA funds in a way that includes community input and includes being able to reach out to community partners to fund those needs. So again, supportive of the intent in terms of leveraging ARPA funds immediately. And so I hope we can keep having those conversations about how that looks in our ARPA allocation process. I just don't see an ordinance and an allocation process kind of driving.
Further discussion. Seeing none, item number 5A will not move forward. Councilmember McConnell.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I don't think my microphone was working. I was actually trying to speak to the last item before moving it forward. But I just wanted to say to Councilmember Gardner that, again, I'm coming at this from a place of good faith. I support the direction this is going. I just want us to be able to talk to our mental health first. I want us to see what other opportunities may exist to partner with other jurisdictions and to better leverage the funding that we have. Mental health is absolutely a high priority, I think, for all of us. You've heard that from all of us. So I'm hoping in moving it forward, which again, it's your prerogative, and I support you in doing that. It's nothing new, and we've all done that before at one point or another. But I'm hoping that we can actually have a conversation as opposed to just holding fast to this version of it. Because I think that there's probably a way that we can all get to yes on this. So.
Seeing no further discussion, is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, then item number 5A will not move forward. Item number 5B, proposed amendments to Article 3-5, subparent A of the city charter pertaining to partisanship of elections. Councilmember McConnell.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I wanted to bring this forward to the full council, since this is something that we've touched on already a little bit during our group stalemate, our stalemate for filling the Ward 2 vacancy. As I said then, my original intent was to actually create a process for special elections. But after doing some homework on special elections, I kind of discovered a few hurdles that I'll bring up here. So first, I reached out to the Arapahoe County Clerk's office, and cost was the first thing that was brought to my attention. We normally get charged based on a weighted population average for the cost of administering election by the county. So that means that our costs get reduced the more jurisdictions participate in an election. So they sent over a copy of the invoice, or preliminary invoice for the November 2nd election. With just for Arapahoe County alone, the total cost is $643,000. But thankfully, since we're doing that weighted population average, our share is just about $106,000, close to $107,000. And Katie, if you have an updated version of that final price, you can chime in at the end here. But for a special election, we would actually need to bear the entirety of the cost for an election if it's just us who are basically making that happen. Now, the cost wouldn't be, $643,000, but it would be a pretty substantial amount. The Adams County election would be pretty substantial as well, and Douglas County would be way less than the other two counties, but would still be some kind of cost associated there as well. And then the second issue that came to light when I was researching special elections was the issue of participation. So our regular municipal elections already have really, really low turnout. So those of us who got elected in 2019, I think we got elected with a 35% turnout. And those of us who got elected in 2017 enjoyed somewhere around like a 25% turnout. And special elections have even lower turnout than that, which exacerbates a problem that we have with our regular municipal races, where, in my opinion, we don't really generate representative outcomes, and we should probably do something about that. So with the costs of our special elections being high and participation being potentially lower even than our regular municipal elections, I decided to keep looking for some other solutions and arrived at this proposal. So I looked at what our state legislature does to fill vacancies and found that it accomplished one of the goals that y'all heard me reiterate a lot when we were in our 150 rounds or so of voting, which was I was trying to focus on keeping the values that people voted for in place when we're, trying to fill a vacancy. And, some folks accused me of potentially using it to advantage my side of the aisle, or, that I would do the same if I was in that position. I told you then I wouldn't. And this proposal that I'm bringing forward to, tonight, again, would prohibit any of us from doing that. So when there's a vacancy at the state legislature, a vacancy committee is created, and that vacancy committee is comprised of the precinct committee people who belong to the party of the person who vacated the seat. So if a Democrat vacates a seat, a Democratic vacancy committee comprised of the precinct committee people for a given district or Senate seat, actually happened pretty recently, I think, with Senator Kagan when he resigned. They get together and they get to vote on who they want to replace that person. So the values stay with the seat. Same thing would happen regardless of your party. If you were an elected Libertarian or Green Party member. And then the process for unaffiliated members is interesting. It would get kicked back to the folks who signed the nominating petition. So if you're a state level unaffiliated, which I don't think we've had, at least since I've lived in Colorado. But if that were to happen, it would be the folks who signed your nominating petition who would comprise the vacancy committee. And that's something that's really easily transferable to our municipal seats. And the second thing that stuck out to me is that, even numbered years, partisan elections have much higher turnout than we have with our nonpartisan off-year elections. And nonpartisan in quotes, you already know how I feel about that. So I did more reading into that phenomenon, and you already saw some of the supporting evidence in the backup, and found that partisan races have higher rates of participation than nonpartisan races. There have even been, like I said, there's already studies in your backup. And one of the interesting things that one of the papers, actually I think two of them, talk about is that not having party affiliation on the ballot is actually an information barrier for some people. And that is a big contributor to why we see lower voter turnout. And if any of y'all have been knocking doors this cycle, I've already knocked close to 400 doors, and I knocked, north of 3,000 for myself in 2019. It's one of the most common questions I get on doors, and I'm sure the same is true for y'all. And from that, after that, typically, specifics follow about issues and other things. So we can't fix the issue of low information from a media standpoint. I think that's another one of the issues that contributes to low turnout for our municipal races. But we can fix the issue of low information on the ballot. And that ties into the vacancy committee structure that we'd be borrowing from the state legislature. So given that partisan races have higher turnout, which is something that I think we should all be interested in fostering, regardless of our affiliation, and that we could really easily employ a vacancy system to accompany that change, ensuring that we don't ever have a repeat of the Ward 2 vacancy going into the future. this is the proposal I wanted to settle on and bring forward to council for discussion. I'll also note that this doesn't cost us anything because we would basically just be using the same ballots that we have now. The only difference is that we'd have a party affiliation on the ballot beginning in 2023. And then the vacancy committees are actually handled by the parties. So for example, for Senator Kagan's committee, vacancy committee, they, I think, rented out Englewood City Hall, if memory serves, and had the election there. So, or one of the rooms at Englewood City Hall. So that's kind of how that would work. So it kind of offs the cost of the vacancy committee to the parties, while ensuring that representation, is maintained, and that the values of a given seat stay with the, with what the voters voted for. And with that, I am happy to address any questions or concerns y'all may have. And I believe Dave Lathers is on the line as well to take questions.
Discussion, questions?
Chair.
Councilmember Lawson.
Councilmember Marcano, so I mean, I have a couple concerns with this. So let me just tell you where my concerns are. Essentially, there's a lot of jobs. A lot of people have jobs who maybe want to serve, and there's a lot of positions, nonprofit corporations, whatever, that may have a clause that says that they cannot participate in elections if they are partisan. I'm a product of that. I was asked if this election was partisan, and the only reason why I was able to run is because it was considered nonpartisan. This council talks about, inclusion and voices of people. Well, to me, with this, you are kind of maybe figuring out a segment of a population that may want to run because we're not a full-time council, that may want to run because they may not be able to because you're making these seats partisan. I just have a real issue with that, and I'm just a product of that. So I don't really agree with you on that particular part of making it partisan. In the Ward 2 council race, there is an individual that is considered unaffiliated. If we had this seat partisan, she would not have been able to run. And I just think that you're kind of limiting people who may want to run for these seats because you're going to make these elections partisan. I do not understand how you're dealing with the unaffiliated, because I'm an unaffiliated and I'm not even sure how that would work. And then thirdly, if you're knocking on doors, you can go up to people and say, I'm this, I'm that. You can go on a forum and say, this is my political position. I understand 2023 is coming up, and maybe that's why we want to get this passed, but I really see real issues. My particular issue with it is maybe limiting potential voices or potential people who really want to serve. Their issue is not to be political, but really to serve the community and the residents. And so that's where I have an issue with this. And at this point, I will not support this.
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. So I want to run through the points that you brought up here. So I understand that some jobs don't allow for partisan positions. And that is, gosh, how do I put this? I think the pretense that some of us might have around partisan positions, I don't think it is one that is a positive thing. And unfortunately, if an employer requires that you can't serve in a partisan position, I don't think that that should have any bearing, frankly, on your employment, but I understand that that's up to that employer. The reality of the situation is that all of us have some kind of ideological compass and, a value system, some kind of moorings. And what political parties are shorthand, by and large, for those values. So my intent here is not to exclude anyone, and the way this is currently written, it wouldn't begin to take effect until the 2023 election. Because that's going to be our next election after this would be voted on by the voters. Your second point is that unaffiliated would not be able to run. That's untrue. The ordinance specifically lays out the process for filling vacancies for unaffiliated voters, and I did touch on it a little bit, but I'll reiterate. And that's that the current way state statute works for a vacancy committee for unaffiliated is that the people who sign your nominating petition to get on the ballot without a party affiliation, those folks are actually your vacancy committee. So we already have a process to petition onto the ballot. That's not changing with this ordinance. The only thing that's changing is that our races would be made openly partisan, transparently partisan. So you would appear unaffiliated on a ballot, hypothetically. I would appear as a Democrat. Councilmember Gruber, I'll pick on you since you're leaving. You'd be a Republican on the ballot. And that's just, I think, being honest with voters about our values and our affiliation. But that doesn't preclude anybody from running. You're right. I think Jessica Giamalvo is unaffiliated in Ward 2. And no, she'd still absolutely be able to petition onto the ballot with this charter change. And her vacancy committee would be the folks who signed her petition. And then the last point, that we can identify ourselves however we choose to. You're absolutely right. I changed my, door spiel basically after getting asked, for the umpteenth time what my party was. And I was just, I'm Juan Marcano. I'm a Democrat running for Ward 4 on the Aurora City Council. But that's not really enough to accomplish the information aspect of this, because one of the things I touched on was the low turnout in nonpartisan races. And what a lot of the research, again, that's in your backup shows is that when folks don't have easy access to information, it turns them off. So we basically disenfranchise a bunch of people. We make it harder for them to vote. It's actually a form of voter suppression because this typically impacts communities of color. So to me, it's actually an equity issue in addition to a transparency issue. So I think having our affiliation on the ballot has way more pros than cons. And, again, I think to anyone who's been a frequent viewer of our city council meetings, they can tell that this is it's a pretty partisan dynamic that we have here, whether or not we have an affiliation on the ballot. It's unfortunate, but I think it's just kind of human nature, maybe not even human nature, but just part of how our political system fosters exchange. And I'm hoping that, bringing this level of transparency into our local process will help be a catalyst for future change to make our politics more accessible and more honest. Because I'd like to see ranked choice voting and a bunch of other changes in the future as well.
Mayor.
Did that answer your questions, Councilmember Lawson? Okay.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilman Mayor Pro Tem Berger.
Thank you. I don't really even understand the need to have party affiliation in a local race. I was elected in 2015. I was elected again in 2019, and I knocked on a lot of doors. Mm-hmm. And actually, very few people asked my party affiliation. And when they did, I told them it was a nonpartisan election, and that focused on local issues. And I think that's what it's about. It's about being able to talk about what issues affect them and what services the city is supposed to provide. So water and roads and public safety and those type of things that are the core of what we provide to our citizens. I don't know if this is a way to garner more votes for your party. If you look at demographics in our city, certainly it leans more Democrat. But I think it's really unfair to voters to assume that they should just vote based on their party affiliation. I personally had Democrats that volunteered on my campaign, and I'm a Republican. And that's because I have never pushed a Republican issue. And if you can point to one, please tell me, because I've never done it. It's not like I'm pushing something that the National Republican Party talks about or the state Republicans. I have never done that because I just focus on the local level and the local issues. And I think, unfortunately, we have become partisan because some issues were really, honestly, non-city issues that were pushed down and made it partisan in terms of our discussions. So I don't understand the motive behind it. And I just think it's unfair to our voters that they should be able to elect someone based not on party affiliation, but whether they are the best person based on background and based on values. You can talk about values and they can do research. And by the way, the Republican Party doesn't do anything with local elections. Like they're not helping us if that's, what's going on here.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So just a couple things on that point. I mean, first of all, I do think I have been asked a lot about party affiliation on doors as well, and seen a lot of conversation online this cycle about party affiliation. So that may not be your experience, but it's certainly an experience that other folks have. But in terms of not pushing Republican or Democratic issues, I think the partisanship shows up not just because some people are bringing partisan issues forward. I don't think that people being able to survive and thrive and have housing in our city is or should be a partisan issue. And it has become one because what people are voting or are advocating from, voting from, and operating from is their political ideology. And that's what's reflected, right? When you're saying, well, government just shouldn't have anything to do with X, Y, and Z, that is a Republican ideological position. And so you're still operating from that ideological position. It's not a platform issue, but when your party doesn't have a platform, it's very easy to say, I can't point to an item from the platform that I've brought forward on city council, but it's still the ideology of that party. And finally, I believe just this last weekend, Christy Burton Brown did host a Get Out the Vote launch. So yes, the Republican Party is absolutely involved in this election.
Mayor.
May I respond just to one thing?
Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember McConnell.
So on the minimum wage, for me, that was not a Republican or Democrat issue. It was an economic issue. And I came from the perspective of how that would affect the economy in general, in terms of a business shutting down, laying off employees, then that employee no longer has a job, no longer has benefits. I looked at it simply from a practical perspective. You may not agree with my perspective, but it was not based on a party, position. I didn't go to my party and go, hey, what am I supposed to do on this? I made my own decision based on talking to business owners and talking to to small business owners and how it would affect not just them, but their employees. And that's how I arrived at my decision.
Mayor. Mayor, you're muted.
Sorry, Councilmember McConnell.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I want to quickly respond to, well, I guess all the points you made, so bear with me. So respectfully, the exact rationale that you gave here for the minimum wage is a Republican position. Like when people talk about minimum wage and they say, well, we need to elect Democrats so we can raise the minimum wage. They know that, generally speaking, Democrats support raising the minimum wage. The exact amount may vary, but they know that we know that what is currently happening is unsustainable, unfair to workers, and is frankly contributing to economic calamity in our city. So we have a differing viewpoint there, but again, it's a very traditional Democratic versus Republican viewpoint. So I think you kind of made my point for me. Local issues also, I kind of want to touch back on that because you're right, it's roads and potholes and things of that nature, but it's also wages, as we just touched on, environmental protections. We had arguments over masking early on in the COVID pandemic that unfortunately became partisan, but they were very well represented in those conversations. Economic development incentives, which used to actually be a bipartisan consensus, or not a bipartisan consensus necessarily, but a bipartisan effort to actually rein those in nationwide. But unfortunately, that became a partisan issue as well. Campaign contributions are a hell of a thing. So, I think that well, I understand what you're saying, and that you come to these things, through a process, but that manifests in your ideology, which manifests in your affiliation. So again, the parties are really just shorthand for values, Councilmember Bergen, or Mayor Pro Tem Bergen. So respectfully, I think you're kind of actually making the point.
And may I respond, Mayor?
I think I'd like to bring this to a close pretty soon here.
Well, yeah, I just need to say that
Mayor Pro Tem.
I don't make those decisions that way. And you're acting like it's because I'm a Republican, and I'm telling you that I come at it from a practical perspective and do my homework. And it may not agree with you, but you had a forum the other day where people said they wanted to do a $27 minimum wage, $27 an hour minimum wage. What do you think a burger is going to cost for the poor person who buys hamburgers or buys milk, and that milk is going to be more expensive. So it's not Republican, Democrat. It's actually just common sense and economic development. So you could say raise wages, but then what does that do to products and that people have to buy? It all is going to go up.
Mayor.
Okay, we're not going to resolve this. I would like to bring this to a close. Councilmember McConnell, can you give the concluding remarks, please?
I wanted to bring us back to the topic, but I did want to address that as well. We're not discussing, minimum wage right now, but I do want to point out that, again, the exact rationale that you laid out is something that I hear from Republicans at every level of government. I would also add that it's not true. That's not how wages and prices work. If you increase labor costs, you're right, there's going to be some level of increase, but I want to point out to you all that places with higher minimum wages pay sometimes less for burgers than we do, because it all depends on profit margins and economies of scale and a bunch of other factors. But I digress. So again, the reason I brought this forward was to do two things. One is to address our vacancy conundrum without costing the city any more money. And two, to actually increase voter turnout by providing voters more information on the ballot. And I think that, again, the first is something that we discussed intermittently during our 150 plus votes trying to fill the Ward 2 vacancy. And I thought that we had some agreement that we needed to find a better way to do things. I think this is objectively a better way to do things. The second is to increase voter turnout and transparency and information for Aurorans. And I think that increasing voter turnout is something that we should all be committed to, regardless of our political affiliation. So I would encourage a yes vote on this. Again, it's not just us making this decision. This would actually go to the voters next year, and they'd get to decide on this for whether they want to keep the status quo or if they want to change this for 2023 and onward.
Is there opposition to the Marcano proposal?
Gruber opposes.
Mayor. Councilmember Hiltz, can I make a comment still? Or
Please proceed.
I would like to see this go through committee personally. I think bringing it straight to study session is fine and certainly a prerogative, but we have this process that we constantly talk about needing to go through. And I think there's a lot to work through and a lot of just things to kind of follow through from the conversation to their ends that needs to be workshopped, and it's a big change. And I think Councilmember Lawson also brings up a good point. This is not a full-time council, and so in order to be on this council, most people have to have some type of outside employment or a partner who has that employment. And so making this change without having any conversation around how to mitigate the impact that has on people who won't be able to run because they can't keep their jobs. I mean, that is a larger conversation. I think that needs to be had. So I think it needs to go back through committee. I think we're right now in the middle of an election season. So bringing forward a ballot proposal when we keep kicking things to December when we have a full council, I think this just needs to go through the formal process. And so that would be my preference.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
First of all, I object to the proposal, but also I want to say that I think it's an insult to people's critical thinking skills that they would just vote by party affiliation. It's insulting.
Okay, Councilmember Bergen votes no, or is in opposition. Councilmember Lawson is in opposition. Councilmember Gruber is in opposition.
I'm in opposition because I want it to go to committee, but not necessarily overall. So
I understand. Okay. Councilmember Hills in opposition. Councilmember Coombs.
I'm not in opposition, but I do want to point out that we have not actually deferred anything to when we have a full council. We've only mentioned doing so.
Very well. Councilmember Coombs is in support?
Yes.
Councilmember McConnell in support?
Yep.
Let's see. Councilmember Gardner? Councilmember Gardner present. Okay, is there anybody else in opposition? Mayor's in opposition. 1, 4, 5. Oh, with 5 in opposition, the proposal does not move forward. Seeing no other business before the council, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.